Beyond the Mage. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 151 Spell Training. That's how it is, Fallon nodded mechanically, responding outwardly. No, that's not it, but inwardly, he roared. The disbelief in his wide eyes revealed Fallon's true emotions. As a second-ring mage, he couldn't even manipulate his mage hands to assemble such delicate metal parts. How could a mage apprentice do it? And so quickly? Of course, not only Fallon, but the surrounding students also turned their shocked gazes to Gouda. No one expected that the seemingly ordinary Gouda would have such a high level of mastery over his mage hands. With a Wind Spirit Moon Shadow skill point added, Mage Hands Plus could perform complex activities just like the caster's own hands, and disassembly and assembly were naturally no problem. The only difficulty was that the assembly work, which originally required two hands, could now only be done with one mage hand. This made Gouda feel slightly strained, to the point that he broke out in a little sweat. Concentrating on his work, he didn't notice that Fallon had assembled the equipment using only his own hands. Therefore, he didn't realize anything was amiss. He only saw Fallon as astonished that Fallon's control over the mage's hands was on par with his own. Actually, he had hesitated slightly. Later, he felt there was no need to deliberately hide his abilities, at least not here. A tree that stands out in the forest will be felled by the wind, but similarly, if you don't appropriately showcase your talents, you'll miss many opportunities. The only thing that frustrated Gouda was that he easily lost focus once he entered a state of concentration. So even though he initially considered slowing down and at least appearing somewhat inferior to his mentor, Fallon, once he was truly immersed, he couldn't care less about that, and ended up finishing a bit too quickly, creating a somewhat awkward situation. At least that was the case for Fallon. His original plan was to randomly select a student to perform the work he had just done. Then, after the student exhausted all his strength and still failed, he smiled and said, "See? This is what I meant by the application, control, and understanding of spells. It can make the same spell look completely different in the hands of different mages. What's this called? This is called teaching by example. This is called comparative teaching." But now, the student he picked performed much better than him. How could he continue the lesson? Although this, from another perspective, also verified the statement that the application, control, and understanding of spells can make the same spell look completely different in the hands of different mages, it was clear that Fallon wasn't shameless enough to use himself as a negative example. Should he pick another student as a negative example? In the end, Fallon didn't shamelessly carry out his sudden idea. "Very good, you did very well," he just forced a sincere compliment to Gouda, then pretended nothing had happened and abruptly moved on to the lesson content. How do you improve your spell usage? First, you need to master sufficient theoretical knowledge, including elemental properties and spell principles. Then, through repeated practice, you gradually grasp the essence and details of spells, including the trajectory and speed of spell flight. Casting spells more often, enough times, will definitely improve your familiarity and control over them. Finally, clarify your direction and practice accordingly. For example, if you want to improve the accuracy of a certain spell, you can set up several moving targets and practice attacking them. With consistent practice, the accuracy of that spell will naturally increase. Of course, while practice is useful, it requires a great deal of time and effort. There are definitely techniques, experiences, and certain patterns that can help you save effort. The focus of this lesson is to teach you these techniques, experiences, and patterns, but whether you can ultimately apply them depends on your own understanding and effort. After half an hour of theoretical knowledge, Farron finally stopped. He activated the trial puppet in the arena. The trial puppet immediately began moving erratically left, right, forward, and backward at an extremely fast speed. Activate the trial puppet's quick dodge mode, and you can practice improving the accuracy of some spells, such as Fire Arrow and Magic Blast. As he spoke, the mage Farron extended his right hand, his fingertips trembling slightly. Magic Blast. The next moment, he shouted softly, and a powerful beam of energy instantly erupted from his fingertips, accurately striking the rapidly moving trial puppet. The trial puppet was struck by this sudden energy beam and instantly stopped moving, but it was clear that apart from some slight widening, there were no other obvious signs of damage. Obviously, it was quite resilient. At that moment, some words suddenly flashed in the trial puppet's electronic screen-like eyes. The left eye displayed, category, force field damage, the right eye displayed, attack power. 10 grams of magic crystal equivalent. This is how the trial puppet is used. First, it simulates the enemy behavior patterns you might encounter in battle, to meet your needs. Second, it records the type and power of spell damage it receives. Magic crystal equivalent is a unit set by mages to measure the destructive power of spells. Magic crystal equivalent represents the energy released when 1 gram of standard magic crystal explodes, Mage explained. However, we often simply call it degree. Magic energy explosion is generally recognized as the most powerful spell in magic, with a power of 10 degrees. Of course, the destructive power of a spell cannot be judged solely by its attack power. For example, against plant-type ley-line creatures, a fire arrow with only an 8-degree power can inflict more substantial damage than a 10-degree magic energy explosion. Therefore, knowing which spell is most suitable in various situations is also a skill, something I will teach you in later lessons. Let's get back to the point. As you all know, most spells, at least low-level spells, have a projectile trajectory. They only deal damage if they hit. Many ley-line creatures can move quickly, and even mages can use spells to increase their movement speed. Given this, ensuring your spells hit their mark accurately against fast-moving targets is obviously crucial. If you want to hide a fast-moving target as precisely as I did, you need to practice constantly, mastering the casting speed and flight speed of each spell, and developing muscle memory to instantly judge your distance to the target. There are no shortcuts. It can only be achieved through continuous practice and accumulation. I know many of you are already struggling to pay for the course, but I still recommend you come to the spell testing field regularly for practice. This is necessary. Furthermore, if you don't do this, you might not pass the final assessment, Fallon kindly reminded you. Alright, that's all for today. Get out of class dismissed. With that, Mage Fallon announced the end of Get Out of Class. Chapter 152, The Spawn of the Insect Swarm. After Master Farron left, the students gradually dispersed. Gauda did the same. He first went to the restaurant for dinner, then returned to continue constructing the spell model for Swarm Spawn. Yesterday, he exhausted his mental energy but failed to successfully construct the spell model for Swarm Spawn. Today, it seemed his luck had turned around. On his first attempt, he succeeded in constructing it in one go. Seeing the spell model for Swarm Spawn appear in the spell starry sea, Gauda, slightly pleased, immediately summoned the rudimentary information interface. The origin section showed that he still had 2 points of origin fully accumulated but unused. As for the spells section, a bunch of unadded spells were flashing, tempting Gauda. Gauda remained unmoved, his goal clear. Of all the waters in the world, he would only take a sip. Although it was because he could only drink a small portion, Gauda's gaze fell upon the newly appeared spell, Swarm Spawn, in the spell bar, and he expertly tapped the flashing yellow plus sign after its name. He had reserved the source for these rare spells. Whoosh! The Big Dipper, representing the scorpion source, instantly burst forth, the old spell model branching out and rapidly expanding into a new one. Soon, Swarm Spawn, in the spell bar became Swarm Spawn Plus, Swarm Spawn Plus, Conjuration, 0 rings. You cause a creature within 30 feet of your sight to temporarily be infested with mites, fleas, mosquitoes, and other insects. The target suffers some toxin damage depending on their physical strength and incurs negative statuses such as itching and paralysis. Additional, you can cause a creature within 30 feet of your sight to permanently be infested with subtle parasites such as midges, grubs, horseflies, and ticks. This causes the creature to randomly contract various diseases, including hemorrhagic fever, typhus, and tick-borne encephalitis. This is the most significant change to spells among all the skill point allocations for Wind Spirit Moon Shadow to date. It's practically a bonus spell, dividing Swarm Spawn into 2 versions. Poison Disease, Swarm Spawn Plus, Poison, is a combat spell, while Swarm Spawn Plus, Disease, is more like a utility spell. In intense and brief battles, it doesn't play a significant role. Swarm Spawn Plus, Poison, is still the preferred choice. Its strength lies in stealth. If someone offends Gauda, and Gouda can't directly retaliate, then Swarm Spawn plus Disease can come in handy. In any case, increasing the diversity of one's spellcasting methods is always good, so Gouda is generally quite satisfied. The next day, after finishing today's basic culture class in cultivation, Gouda once again came to the spell experiment field. He had taken to heart Master Farron's reminder yesterday, and he was also very interested in the functions of the spell testing puppet. He did indeed need to test his spells more thoroughly, especially since several of his attack spells had been enhanced by Wind Spirit Moon Shadow, and to be honest, Gouda didn't fully understand the specific changes they caused. He went to the counter and asked the price. How much is a private room? 5 silver for a mage apprentice for half an hour, 1 gold for a full-fledged mage for half an hour, minimum rental of half an hour, the staff member quoted. Unlike the young and beautiful ladies in other parts of the academy, the staff member at the spell testing field was a bald, burly man. He looked very imposing. Full-fledged mages, in terms of spell power and the total number of spells they can cast, far surpass mage apprentices, which causes greater wear and tear on the spell testing puppet, so the price is correspondingly higher, the bald, burly man explained. Gouda nodded and handed over 5 3-leaf silver coins. I'm a mage apprentice, renting for half an hour, okay, please show me your identification badge. Gouda handed over his identification badge, which contained his student information, including his mage level. The bald, burly man took Gouda's identification badge, swiped it on the alchemy machine at the counter to confirm Gouda's mage level, and then took the 5 silver coins, quickly registering him. Second room on the left, room number 8, soon. He handed Gouda a magic card similar to a room key along with the identification badge. Gouda took it, found his rented room, swiped the magic card in the groove at the door, and the corresponding magic circle activated the door to open. He entered. Although it was a private room, it was actually about the size of a basketball court in Gouda's previous life, and 3 trial puppets were placed inside. Let's test the power of the spells I currently possess. Gouda aimed at a trial puppet, and with a thought, a small ball of emerald green acid was thrown directly at its sizzle. Sizzle. Sizzle, the trial puppet emitted a sizzling sound, accompanied by white smoke and a pungent sulfuric acid smell. Then, the display screens on the trial puppet size displayed the following text: category, strong acid damage, attack power. 6 grams of magic crystal equivalent. These were the instantaneous data. While both are spells, Acid Splash is only about half the power of Magic Blast. However, the acid residue adhering to the trial puppet's surface continuously inflicts a level 1 corrosive damage. It lasted a full 10 seconds before the acid in Gouda's Acid Splash Plus was completely consumed. Based on this calculation, the total power should be 16 levels. Of course, this calculation doesn't take into account enemy resistance. If the enemy has some resistance, the level 1 continuous corrosive damage might not even break through their defenses. Gouda then tested other attack spells. Flame Arrow plus fire damage, attack power 8 degrees. Flame Arrow remains the highest damage spell among Gouda's spells. In most cases, high power equals high damage. Therefore, Flame Arrow is still Gouda's most frequently used attack spell. Frost Ray plus freezing damage, attack power 7 degrees. Its power is slightly higher than Acid Splash, but slightly weaker than Flame Arrow. However, if the trial golem has already withstood 2 Frost Ray attacks, the third Frost Ray will increase its attack power to 10 degrees. Calculating the total power of the 3 attacks, Frost Ray plus 7 degrees plus 7 degrees plus 10 degrees is equal to Flame Arrow plus 8 degrees 3. However, the first 2 Frost Ray plus attacks will slow down the trial golem. The third Frost Ray plus will condense a thin layer of ice on the trial golem's surface, temporarily freezing it. This means that, with equal power, it also comes with 2 soft crowd control effects and 1 hard crowd control effect. Considering this, Frost Ray Plus is quite cost-effective. Especially in already extremely cold environments, it can trigger the freezing effect directly without even needing the initial 2 casting setups. Swarm Spawn Plus, Toxin Damage, Attack Power 6. As a rare spell, Swarm Spawn's attack power is not high, equal to Acid Splash. As for Swarm Spawn plus Disease, since the experiment golem is an alchemical creation, not a living being, it cannot contract or detect diseases, so testing is currently impossible. Chapter 153 Going into the Mountains to Hunt Birds. Frost Gold Month, 30th. On the last day of Frost Gold month, Gata was unusually free of classes. Of course, his Ice Rune tutoring class wouldn't stop. But the Rune class only lasted half a day, so Gata had half a day free. He wouldn't waste this half day of free time. Gata planned to go into the mountains to hunt birds. Just as the Mage friend said, spells aren't finished once the spell model is built. You need to cast them more and practice more to gradually master the essence and details of spells, improving proficiency and control. Compared to spending money to practice with spell testing puppets in the spell testing field, practicing with red-eyed sparrows was obviously more useful. In addition, Gata's savings had now dropped to 71 gold and 12 silver, and he urgently needed to increase income and obtain new revenue. Each red-eyed sparrow was worth 1 gold coin. And according to the description in the Mountain Patrol quest, a large number of red-eyed sparrows had escaped from the pet system. Since the adjective large number was used, there must be more than 100, right? Furthermore, if he hunts down 7 red-eyed sparrows, he can gain another bit of essence. Such a win-win-win situation is something Gata is naturally happy to undertake. Most importantly, according to the quest description, the red-eyed sparrows aren't particularly aggressive. In other words, the difficulty of this quest lies in finding the red-eyed sparrows in the vast back mountain area, not in killing them. This happens to be exactly what Gata excels at. The back mountain of Seer's Academy isn't dangerous because it's not a wild, undeveloped area, but a developed scenic area. After rounds of cleansing by the Academy's mages, all the Leeline creatures in the mountain have long since disappeared. In most cases, the back mountain's function is simply to provide a suitable environment for certain magical plants within the Academy that require a natural habitat. Besides, it serves a scenic purpose. This is why the task of clearing the red-eyed sparrows is assigned to the students as a mountain patrol quest. Because this quest is essentially a menial task, not a combat mission, and it's not urgent at all. The Academy's only concern is that the red-eyed sparrows will disrupt the ecosystem of the back mountain. It took Gata half an hour to officially enter the Academy's back mountain area from the teaching area. Compared to the desolate forests, littered with withered leaves and fraught with danger, the back mountain was not only safe but also had a man-made path due to the frequent visits of mages. Of course, to hunt birds, one couldn't simply follow the path, one had to venture deeper into the forest. The quest included a document detailing the habits of the red-eyed sparrow. Most importantly, it outlined the red-eyed sparrow's preferred habitats and food. Areas near water sources and abundant fruit were the red-eyed sparrow's preferred habitats. Wild fruits and berries growing in bushes, and magical plants were the red-eyed sparrow's preferred foods. There were several magical plant cultivation areas established by the Academy's potion-making mages in the back mountain, but these were all protected by barriers or magic arrays, preventing the red-eyed sparrow from approaching. Only the former needed to be considered. Gata gradually moved away from the man-made path, stepping into the denser forest. The surrounding scenery changed accordingly. The trees grew taller, their foliage denser, and the air was filled with a fresh scent of earth and leaves. Gata looked around, careful not to miss a red-eyed sparrow lurking in a branch. A glint of light flashed in his eyes. He had already used Detection Magic Plus upon entering the back mountain. This was Gata's secret weapon for hunting birds. Detection Magic Plus didn't have a particularly wide detection range, but its ability to detect the magical aura of living creatures certainly gave him a better chance of finding the well-hidden red-eyed sparrows than other students on missions. Gata ventured deeper into the forest, constantly referring to a map of the back mountain. He did this to avoid getting lost and to avoid entering the Academy's designated remote area. Soon, Gata discovered a clear stream. The water babbled gently. Various wildflowers and wild fruits grew on both sides of the stream. This perfectly matched the red-eyed sparrow's preferred habitat. Gata immediately slowed his pace, carefully observing his surroundings. Suddenly, a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. It originated from a dense thicket of bushes not far away. Even drawn by the light, Gata glanced over but couldn't see any trace of its source besides the piled-up green leaves. However, he noticed remnants of pecked fruit hanging on some branches of the bushes. A slight thought crossed Gata's mind. He was already 80% certain. Indeed, adept at concealment, he murmured to himself. Without any hesitation, in a flash, Gata had already cast Fire Arrow Plus towards the thicket. Of all the spells he knew, Fire Arrow was not only the most powerful but also the longest range and fastest, making it the perfect choice for hunting birds. A burst of blazing flame instantly tore through the air, shooting towards the bushes, radiating magical light with a dazzling trajectory. However, just as the flaming arrow was about to strike its target with pinpoint accuracy, a sparrow with red eyes and a bluish-gray coat suddenly flew out of the bushes at incredible speed, seemingly about to escape. This perfectly matched the mission description of the red-eyed sparrow, specially trained and extremely alert. But for Gouda, this was useless. A thought flashed through his mind. The exploding flaming arrow suddenly made a sharp turn, tracing a jaw-dropping arc in the air, shooting upwards in an extremely illogical trajectory, closing in on the panicked, fleeing red-eyed sparrow. The red-eyed sparrow was so startled that its feathers almost stood on end, its wings frantically flapping in the air, trying to avoid a sudden threat of death. But even with its extensive training and incredible speed, at such a close distance, it simply couldn't react in time. Boom! With a crisp sound, the flaming arrow struck the red-eyed sparrow precisely. Instantly engulfing it in flames, it plummeted like a kite with a broken string. After crashing to the ground, it struggled and flapped its wings a few times before falling silent. Only a wisp of smoke slowly dissipated and the acrid smell of burnt food lingered in the air. Origin: 0 ring, red-eyed sparrow, 1/7. A hint of satisfaction flashed in Gouda's eyes as he looked at the newly appeared entry in the origin section. But this wasn't the end. Gouda walked to the red-eyed sparrow's corpse, took out the hidden mist fang, and deftly removed a pair of slightly charred red eyeballs from the sparrow's eye sockets. Red-eyed sparrow, 0-ring Leline creature, its bloodline originates from the 2-ring Leline creature Crimson-eyed Fiery Feather, but it did not inherit Crimson-eyed Fiery Feather's ability to control flames. At the same time, the knowledge he had learned in the Mage Basics class a few days ago flashed through Gouda's mind. Leline creatures are very particular about bloodlines. In most cases, tracing upwards along the bloodline will lead to their ancestors in higher rings. Actually, Gouda felt this was very unreasonable. Did Leline creatures have reproductive isolation? But existence is its own justification, so Gouda silently accepted it. The red-eyed sparrow only inherited its ancestors' night vision. Its only outstanding feature is its eyes, which possess exceptional eyesight and are also the hardest part of its body. It is precisely because of its excellent vision and relatively low aggression that the red-eyed sparrow was chosen by the Magic Pet Department to be trained for high-altitude reconnaissance. Gouda carefully placed the extracted eyeball into a cloth bag he carried, then put it away safely before feeling at ease. This was proof of his mission's completion. Without it, the Academy wouldn't recognize his achievements. Gold +1. One leads to another. Finding a red-eyed sparrow here likely means there are others roosting nearby. Gouda continued his work. Chapter 154 Mutual Aid Society. Gouda's deduction was correct. The area crossed by the stream did indeed have many red-eyed sparrows roosting nearby. Within just 1 hour, he had spotted 5 more red-eyed sparrows, all instantly killed by the powerful Flame Arrow Plus effect. In other words, in just over 2 hours, he had earned 6 gold coins, equivalent to the price of a level 0 spell recipe. That's 3 gold per hour. Even for a formal mage, this was a very high amount, let alone for a mere second-tier mage apprentice. Having done this much, Gouda was already preparing to head home. It was still early, and he wasn't unwilling to max out the red-eyed sparrow essence in one go, but the problem was he was out of mana. How could a mage hunt birds without mana? A large part of the reason mage apprentices were called apprentices was because their mana was so limited. Gouda marked his location on the map, planning to come back tomorrow, and then return the way he came. The return journey was always faster, and soon Gouda was back on the man-made path leading to the back mountain. He was about to quicken his pace when someone emerged briskly from the depths of the path. Gouda glanced at her. It was a young woman with blonde hair, wearing the standard robes of the Seers Academy students. She was clearly a senior student, as the freshmen should still be working as gold miners at the foot of the cliff of hardship. She was probably a potion student. Those who could enter the back mountain were either on patrol missions or potion students who frequently went up the mountain to tend to their magical plants. Gouda made this judgment in his mind. However, he didn't think much of it, and didn't even intend to greet her. Everyone at Seers Academy was busy, and unnecessary small talk was rare. Gouda, to Gouda's surprise, the other person spoke first, stopping him. "You know me?" Gouda looked at her, confirming he didn't recognize her, and was somewhat puzzled. "My name is Sadie, and I'm the top student in the potions department," the young woman introduced herself. Then, her eyes gleaming with curiosity, she continued, "You know, In the magic arts department, the competition between our potions and alchemy departments has always been the fiercest, and the instructors of the two departments don't get along very well. As the top student in potions, and especially so in alchemy, where Jerry Harrell is the top student, so when I heard that guy had some crazy idea and went to the cafeteria to target a freshman, I paid a little attention and remembered your name. Later, when you brought a maid clown to our potions department for your entrance mission, I caught a glimpse of you from afar. Goddard understood, then a polite smile appeared on his face. So it's Chief Sadie, I've heard so much about you. May I ask what brings you here? He was asking about the fact that she had stopped him, certainly not just to greet him. Sadie smiled slightly. I was planning to visit you sometime, but I didn't expect to run into you here, so I stopped you. It seems you've taken on the mountain patrol mission, haven't you? Goddard nodded, not wanting to deny it, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Let me be frank, Sadie said softly. I'd like to invite you to join our mutual aid society. Mutual aid society? Goddard raised an eyebrow, hearing this for the first time. What's that? You're probably the only one in the entire academy who doesn't know about the Mutual Aid Society and the Lion Society, Sadie said, shrugging helplessly. But since she'd already extended an invitation to Gouda, she didn't mind playing the role of explainer again. You should know that the students in the academy are generally divided into two types. One type is like us, commoner students who entered the academy openly and legitimately through the academy's entrance examination. Gouda could notice a sense of pride emanating from Sadie when she mentioned passing the academy's entrance examination. For them, it was indeed something to be proud of. Another type is like Jerry Harrell, a noble student who entered the academy through family connections and back channels. Commoner students and noble students usually don't see eye to eye. The former think the latter are worthless, only benefiting from their ancestors' status. The latter, on the other hand, think the former are of lowly birth and unworthy to study alongside them. This dislike sometimes escalates into targeting. Generally speaking, we commoner students can compete with the noble students. After all, they are rich and powerful, while our talents need time to be realized. Later, some commoner students couldn't stand it anymore and stepped forward, rallying all commoner students to join forces, helping each other, progressing together, and simultaneously having the ability to counter the targeting by noble students. This was the prototype of the Mutual Aid Society. After the Mutual Aid Society emerged, a corresponding organization naturally arose among the noble students, namely the Lion Society. The Mutual Aid Society and the Lion Society thus appeared and developed. Now, every new student entering the academy is assigned an invitation from either the Mutual Aid Society or the Lion Society based on their status. Therefore, all students in the entire Sears Academy are either members of the Mutual Aid Society or members of the Lion Society. As for you, Sadie glanced at God and slowly said, the situation is too complicated. Both sides don't consider you one of their own. So, Sadie only hinted very subtly, but it was enough for God to understand. He joined Sears Academy through a letter of recommendation, so he naturally did not meet the Mutual Aid Society's requirement of entering the academy through the entrance examination, but at the same time, he was not a noble's son, he could only be considered a commoner. Therefore, he also did not meet the Lion Society's requirement of noble student membership. Considering he was stuck with neither side, God thought to himself. However, I think that although you did not enter the academy through the examination, you are ultimately not among the noble students. In that case, you meet our Mutual Aid Society's membership criteria. Therefore, on behalf of the Mutual Aid Society, I sincerely invite you to join us. What can I gain by joining the Mutual Aid Society, and what do I need to give? God was silent for a moment before slowly asking. You'll receive resources from the Mutual Aid Association, including intelligence and assistance from its members. For example, if you need a potion and I happen to be available, you only need to provide the raw materials and a small fee, and I can brew it for you. Or, for any team quests, you can find members within the Mutual Aid Association. If any conflicts of interest arise during the quest, the association can coordinate, which is definitely more convenient and reassuring than randomly forming a team. Also, if your graduation project requires help from other mages, the Mutual Aid Association can lend a hand, but in return, you'll need to provide your value to other members. For new students, we don't expect too much in the first year. Consider it using the Mutual Aid Association's resources to train new members, a membership benefit, but from the second year onwards, you'll need to demonstrate your value. Otherwise the Mutual Aid Association's resources will no longer be available to you. The Mutual Aid Association's philosophy has always been mutual assistance, not unpaid help, Sadie emphasized. Chapter 155 Valuing rights and obligations are equal, which is reasonable. And no matter what, in the worst-case scenario, there's a guarantee that you can get free from the Mutual Aid Society's resources for a year. No wonder no new student association has refused the invitations from the Mutual Aid Society and the Lion Club. Seeing that Gata didn't respond, Sadie added, the Mutual Aid Association can even help you coordinate some things internally, like the freshman credit rankings. This year, Yulon will definitely be number 1 in freshman credits, and this ranking will give you a significant boost when you're preparing to advance to first ring Mage and apply for the Spirit Ascension Water from the Academy. You've already taken 8 courses since you came in, clearly showing a strong desire for this ranking. Plus, with a 5-credit reward for breaking the entrance mission record, you do have a good chance if it weren't for Yulon. However, Yulon is already a first-ring Mage and doesn't need the Spirit Ascension Water anymore. If you need it, I can help you coordinate with Yulon to have him take fewer courses this year to make way for you. Of course, besides making up for the bonus he deserves for first place, you'll also have to pay extra compensation, Sadie said calmly, appearing very confident. Clearly, Yulon had already joined the Mutual Aid Association and had some communication with him. Hearing this, Gata's expression changed slightly. He truly hadn't expected the Mutual Aid Association to have such a way of doing things. This was practically a redistribution of Academy resources. However, Gata shook his head at Sadie's suggestion. He didn't need Yulon to make way for him. Firstly, Gata was confident he could achieve the highest academic credits among this year's freshmen. Secondly, he disdained accepting a first-place offered to him by someone else. This was a bit of persistence and arrogance he carried over from his previous life, which might not be suitable for this world, but Gata had no intention of changing it. Another point was, where would he get the resources to pay Yulon extra compensation? With that kind of spare money, he would buy spell recipes or take other courses. I'm willing to join the Mutual Aid Association, but I don't need Yulon to make way for me, Gata said slowly. You're not planning to strive for the honor of being the top freshman in terms of credits? Sadie was slightly surprised by Gata's answer. She thought for a moment, perhaps realizing something, and reminded him, I know you entered with the highest honors, and the Academy will allocate you a bottle of Ascension Water, but I heard from my mentor that you've already given that bottle of Ascension Water to committee member Ral, for his apprentice to use in advancing to first ring Mage. Perhaps committee member Ral promised you something like returning a bottle of Ascension Water to you next year. Sadie seemed to trust Gata completely, not hesitating to say anything offensive. I can only tell you that perhaps committee member Ral was sincere when he promised you that, but now. Sadie paused, leaving him in suspense. Gwen frowned. What happened now? The situation is different now. Triff, the apprentice on whom committee member Ral placed high hopes, failed to advance to first circle Mage even after drinking the Spirit Ascension Water that committee member Ral had obtained for him. Triff is not only committee member Ral's apprentice, but also his sister's only child, so, if committee member Ral really could obtain another Spirit Ascension Water, do you think he would return it to you? Or give it to Treve to help him advance to first circle Mage? Sadie countered. Gwen fell silent for a moment, but in that silence, he actually felt somewhat relieved. Upon reflection, he realized that when he agreed to borrow the Spirit Ascension Water, he had already prepared for the other party not to return it. So, hearing that the other party was having bad luck naturally made him feel relieved. I do intend to strive for first place in freshman credits, but I can do it on my own, Gwen explained. You mean, you're going to compete with Yulon for first place on your own? That's right, you're dreaming. Yulon enters with 22 credits right after completing his entrance mission. Some students finish their second year with roughly the same number of credits. How can you compete with him on your own? Besides, you only get one chance to be number 1 among the freshmen. If you miss this chance, you'll no longer be a freshman. Sadie's words were blunt, but they reflected the facts. What if I could surpass Yulon's credits on my own? Gauda remained calm despite Sadie's skepticism. That's impossible, Sadie chuckled. After that, she didn't discuss the matter further with Gauda. She wasn't related to him, and there was no need for her to do something so thankless. Reality would teach Gauda a lesson. The two then walked towards the outer academy, talking as they went. Sadie gave Gauda a detailed introduction to the Mutual Aid Association and the Lion Society. The president of the Mutual Aid Association was Zai, currently ranked second in total credits in the magic department. According to Sadie, Suri has been a first circle mage for many years and could break through to second circle at any time. She's deliberately suppressing her mage level to awaken a more powerful feat. There are two vice presidents, one is herself, the top student in the potions department, and the other is Leo, the top student in the basic knowledge department. On the lion side, the president is currently the top student in the spells department, Mary Fritz. However, she has already broken through to second circle mage and will graduate from Cyrus Academy this academic year. The two vice presidents are Jerry Harrell, the top student in the alchemy department, and Jairus Arnen, who ranks third in total spells credits. Sadie also specifically mentioned that Donnie Arthur, the current top student in the rune department, is also a member of the Lions Club. Your mentor is the chief instructor of the rune department, Master Hizai, although, theoretically, it would take you at least 4 or 5 years to surpass him in rune arts, but regardless, you're always his potential competitor, so he might target you. Be careful. Thanks for the reminder, I will. They didn't part ways until they left the back mountain. Senior Sadie, before entering the academy, I was a repair craftsman. If anyone in the Mutual Aid Society needs to repair extraordinary items, feel free to come to me. I charge 80% of the market price, Gata casually mentioned. Money was tight right now, every little bit counted. I didn't realize you could do that. Okay, I understand. I'll inform the other Mutual Aid Society members. Sadie watched Gata leave, shook her head, and then walked towards the potions department. You value this freshman that much? She had only taken a few steps when a figure caught up from behind. Among this year's freshmen, besides Yulan Angelica, he should be the one with the highest potential, Sadie said. You know perfectly well that Master Hoshi specially applied for an exemption from runecraft for him. If he didn't have a certain talent for runecraft, why would Master Hoshi have gone to such lengths? If he could follow Master Hoshi and learn runecraft construction, he should be the one leading the Mutual Aid Society after you and me. Why not Yulan? Leo, with a square face and also wearing the student's uniform robe, asked. Yulan, with his talent, he might graduate even earlier than us. Sadie spread her hands, saying helplessly. That's true, Leo murmured. Without many resources and without drinking the ascending water, Yulan had already become a first-rank mage at this age. Once he entered Seer's Academy, wouldn't that be like a fish leaping into the sea? Exactly, this god seems a bit arrogant, a bit ignorant of his own limitations. Sadie hesitated for a moment, but still brought up what God had just said. It's alright, it's not a big problem. When the school year ends, he'll run into obstacles, and his arrogance will naturally disappear, Leo said calmly. I'm just worried he'll miss this opportunity and won't have enough weight to apply for the Spirit Ascension water. People always have to suffer a bit to learn to be humble. Besides, if what you say is true, if he has the opportunity to master rune construction, why would he be afraid of not getting the Spirit Ascension water? If he doesn't have that ability, what's the point of us helping him apply for the Spirit Ascension water? The Mutual Aid Association isn't something an ordinary first-rank mage can handle. Hearing this, Sadie nodded in agreement and said no more. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156 Expanding the Spell Treasury. Gata was unaware that, despite his perceived obscurity, someone had already placed him in a position he never imagined he would attain. The origin of all this was the high regard he held by Hizai, arguably the most accomplished figure in the field of rune construction within the Principality of Xin. It made sense, yet it also made no sense. Because, in fact, he still didn't know exactly what rune construction was. He only vaguely guessed from what he had heard that it was something similar to a set system in a game. But whether his mentor Hizai was prepared to teach him about rune construction, and whether he could learn it, were not things Gata should be concerned with at the moment. Earning money and earning credits were what he should be most concerned about. Actually, Gata didn't have much pressure. He had no deep-seated hatred to avenge, nor any 3-year agreement. So, theoretically, he could live a slightly more relaxed life. However, when it came to studying, he instinctively and habitually couldn't slack off. It was both a habit and a pleasure. He enjoyed the sense of accomplishment from daily learning, the satisfaction of learning new things, and the fulfilling feeling of being busy. Especially in the study of spells and runes. The positive feedback from gaining extraordinary power fueled Gauda's immense enthusiasm for learning spells. The latter possessed a unique, art-like beauty that captivated Gauda. Time flew by, Frost Gold vanished, and Mist Frost Moon arrived. A week had passed since Gauda joined the Mutual Aid Association. Sadie truly kept her word and wasn't just going through the motions. On the very night he joined, a member of the Mutual Aid Association, a first-ring mage, came to him, asking Gauda to help repair a damaged first-ring alchemical artifact. This brought Gauda another 5 gold coins. However, that was the only business, no one else came after that. In the Lions Guild, there might be more business, but most members of the Mutual Aid Association were busy working to support themselves, and very few owned alchemical artifacts. Of course, this was only true within the academy. Because in the academy's environment, there were too many places to spend money and too few places to earn it. However, once these students graduate and leave Sears Academy, their situation will inevitably change after a few years on the outside. In the outside world, they can quickly monetize the knowledge they learned at the academy, provided they graduate smoothly. This week, Gauda's life remained as regular as before, classes and cultivation. However, he also added hunting birds in the mountains. Gauda knew that as time passed, more and more students would accept the missions, while the number of red-eyed sparrows in the back mountains would decrease, so he had to seize this brief period of opportunity. He was still very proactive in making money. Frosty Moon, the 10th. Gauda returned from hunting birds in the back mountains once again. After dinner, he returned to his dormitory close to 8 o'clock in the evening. His usual habit was to almost deplete his mana before returning to the academy. The reason he stayed so late today was simple. Finding red-eyed sparrows in the back mountains was becoming increasingly difficult, and he had no chance to hunt them, so naturally, he had more mana than he could use. In the end, Gauda only made 2 moves, but it was already dark. So he had no choice but to head back. I've exhausted the potential of this mission, continuing would be too inefficient. I'll settle the mission details at the logistics department tomorrow, Gauda decided silently. Then, he habitually went to the small kitchen and cast Water Creation Plus on the large earthenware jar. The next moment, as water appeared in the jar, a familiar, light fragrance wafted out. This jolted Gauda, who was already exhausted, instantly sobering him up. Leak-free water, yes, after nearly 2 months, leak-free water had finally reappeared. Gauda looked at the liquid in the jar with great anticipation. This time, he wouldn't guzzle it down like last time. Make it into a fruit drink, drink a fixed amount each day. 2 gallons of leak-free water should last about 2 months. Frosty Moon, 11th. Logistics Department, Mission Hall. Settle the Mountain Patrol mission. Gauda placed the bag containing the red-eyed sparrow eyeballs he had collected over the week on the counter and said softly, "Okay, quite a few students had accepted and settled Mountain Patrol missions recently. Therefore, the young and pretty counter staff were exceptionally skilled, exchanging no unnecessary words." She took Gauda's ID badge, swiped it on the specially made alchemy machine to record his information, then opened the bag, dumped it onto the table, and prepared to count the eyeballs. However, to her surprise, the bag was far heavier than she had imagined. Driven by inertia, although her mind realized something was wrong, her hands subconsciously continued a dumping motion. Slip, slip. That was the sound of the eyeballs rolling across the table, a continuous sound. The young and pretty staff member, looking at the table full of slightly charred eyeballs, gaped in astonishment. A total of 102 eyeballs, that's 51. According to the mission reward, you should receive 51 gold coins. The staff member, suppressing her shock, counted the eyeballs, then put them back into the cloth bag and stored them away. Then, she took 51 gold coins from the drawer and handed them to Gauda. "Count them." Gauda nodded and began calculating seriously. While Gauda was diligently calculating, the staff member couldn't help but glance at him several times. A jumble of thoughts were running through her mind. The number of eyeballs brought by the other students combined didn't even equal the number of Gauda's alone. Had this young student killed all the red-eyed sparrows? Who is this guy? A red-eyed sparrow killer? The Bird King from Sears Academy? That's right, Gauda had confirmed that all 51 gold coins were there. The staff member nodded and returned Gauda's identification badge. After settling the mission, Gouda left the logistics department. He first went to the academy's trading area and bought another batch of fresh seasonal fruit and yeast, spending 3 silver coins. Then, he headed straight for the library. The first floor contained general books and some papers, the materials of which were mostly free for him. The second floor, however, housed a collection of high-value knowledge from the Seer's Academy, including spell recipes, cultivation methods, potion recipes, magic circle diagrams, and alchemical creation recipes, arguably one of the most important places in the entire Seer's Academy. Not only were there high-level magic circles, but the Academy also stationed high-rank mages there to prevent outsiders from breaking in and stealing recipes. After entering the library, Gouda ascended the internal staircase directly to the second floor. The moment he stepped onto the second floor, Gouda felt a gaze sweep over him. However, he couldn't pinpoint the source of the gaze. But Gouda believed his actions were above board, so he ignored the hidden gaze and continued walking forward calmly. Compared to the massive bookshelves on the first floor, the structure of the second floor was completely different. There was a large hall, behind which were rows of tightly closed libraries. Entering the hall through a corridor, Gouda saw an elderly mage sitting at a wide table, leisurely sipping tea, a book with a yellow leather cover in his hands. The fragrant aroma of tea filled the hall. As soon as Gouda entered, the old mage glanced at him, put down his teacup and book, and asked kindly, "Young man, what do you want?" "A spell recipe," Gouda replied, having already familiarized himself with the process, and handed over his identification badge. Chapter 157 New Spells. Previously constrained by his tight finances, Gouda hadn't purchased spell recipes. After all, the time he needed to build spell models was very short, so he wasn't in a hurry and it wouldn't cause any problems. But now, having suddenly received a huge sum of 51 gold coins through the Mountain Patrol quest, Gouda couldn't contain himself. He planned to buy a few more spell recipes to further expand his spell library, and also to accumulate spells for a possible super feat. The old mage took out his identity badge and scanned it on the alchemy machine. A freshman who just enrolled this year with 10 credits, right? He glanced at Gouda, then pulled a parchment from a stack on the table and handed it to him. This is the list of spells you can buy with your current credits at Cyrus Academy. Not only the Academy facilities, but even paid knowledge required credits to purchase. The minimum credit requirement to buy spell recipes at the Academy was 10 credits. Fortunately, Gouda had received a 5-credit reward during his enrollment quest, otherwise, he wouldn't have anywhere to spend the money now. Gouda took the parchment and began to browse it. The spells listed on the parchment were all level 0 spells, but there were quite a few, about 30 at a glance. Most of the spells Gouda knew were on it. Compared to the Mage Guild, the spell recipes provided by the Academy far surpassed the former in both quality and quantity. At least, the list included many damage-dealing spells, unlike the Mage Guild, which only sold recipes for utility spells. Gouda first eliminated the spells he knew, finding 11 spells to choose from: Fire Control, Light Dance, Light, Spark, Divine Guidance, Wind Dance, Lightning Pull, Earth Shaping, Primal Strike, Water Manipulation, and Fire Combustion. He pondered for a moment and finally selected 7 spell recipes. First were the 4 transformation spells that manipulated the 4 elements of nature: Wind Dance, Earth Shaping, Water Manipulation, and Fire Control. Then there was the spell recipe for Divine Guidance, which he had secretly vowed to obtain when he first saw it. Now that he had seen it, he naturally wanted to choose it. Finally, there was the powerful damage spell, Lightning Pull, and the illumination spell, Light, which he would inevitably use later. Are you sure you want to choose so many spell recipes at once? The Academy generally doesn't recommend that freshmen learn spells first, because the efficiency of learning spells will be higher when the mage's level is higher. Before reaching the level of a third-class mage apprentice, it's more worthwhile to focus your energy and time on courses and cultivation. The old mage frowned and advised him when he saw Gouda choose 7 spells at once. Although he wasn't an academy instructor, he was in constant contact with the students on the second floor of the library, so he was considered a half-instructor. I'll buy them first, and whether I learn them or not depends on whether I have the energy and time. Gouda didn't refuse the old mage's request, but casually came up with a reason. All right then. Seeing Gouda's response, the old mage had no reason to persuade him further. 7 level 0 spell recipes, a flat price of 6 gold per set. The price was the same as what was sold in the Mage Guild. Isn't there a discount? Gata still asked instinctively. If you have more than 50 credits, I'll only charge you 5 gold per set. It turned out there really was a discount, but Gata didn't meet the requirements. Alright, Gata obediently took 42 gold from the 51 gold he had just received and handed it to the old mage. After receiving the money, the old mage got up and went into one of the closed rooms in the library. After a while, he reappeared, this time holding 7 beautifully bound booklets. These were the 7 spell recipes Gata had requested, each booklet bearing the emblem of Seer's Academy in the lower left corner. Your spell recipes, the old maid handed the 7 booklets to Gauda. Carrying 7 newly purchased spell recipes and the fruit drink ingredients, Gauda rushed back to his dormitory. He first followed the same procedure as before, brewing the flawless fruit drink. Then, he went into the meditation room on the 2nd floor, took out the spell recipes, and eagerly began to peruse them one by one. Divine Guidance Prophecy, 0 ring. Select a target to cast this spell, temporarily and slightly increasing their performance in the next skill. Including but not limited to, lockpicking success rate, archery accuracy, item crafting success rate. Gauda was already quite familiar with Divine Guidance. Of course, after several lessons on general spells, 03 ring, introduction, Gauda now knew many spells and was no longer the novice he once was. In short, Divine Guidance was a very useful functional spell, applicable to almost every scenario. While the extent of its effect was unknown and required further testing, it was certainly better than nothing. Fire control, alteration, 0th ring, select a non-magical flame that you can see within a 5 cubic foot radius, and then affect it in one of the following ways. Immediately cause the flame to spread 5 feet in one direction, as if there were wood or other fuel in the new location. Immediately extinguish the flame in that space. Double or halve the size of the bright and dim areas created by the flame, and or change their color. This effect lasts for 1 hour. Create a simple image of the flame, such as a blurry image of a creature, a fixed object, or a location, that appears in the flame and changes as you wish. This image lasts for 1 hour. If you cast this spell multiple times, you can have up to 3 non-immediate effects in effect simultaneously, and you can dispel one of the above effects at any time. Wind dance, alteration, 0th ring. At a point within a 60-foot radius that you can see, the air is controlled by you and forced to produce one of the following effects. A medium or smaller creature of your choice is pushed a distance according to its own strength. You can create a small air burst, enough to move an unheld or uncarried object weighing no more than 5 pounds. The object can be pushed 10 feet away from you. The force generated in this way is insufficient to cause harm. You use air to create harmless sensory sensations, such as rustling leaves, closing blinds, or your clothes swaying in a breeze. Clay shaping, changeable, 0 rings. You select a pile of soil or a rock that you can see within a distance, 60 feet, and that fills a 5 cubic foot space. You can alter it in one of the following ways. If you point to a loose patch of soil, you can immediately dig it up, causing it to travel along the surface and be moved up to 5 feet away. This movement is insufficient to cause harm. You change the shape and or color of the soil or rock. Writing words, drawing patterns, or carving designs. This change lasts for 1 hour. If the soil or rock you specify is on the surface, you can make it a difficult terrain. Alternatively, you can make an already difficult terrain area normal terrain. This change lasts for 1 hour. If you cast this spell multiple times, you can maintain up to 2 non-immediate effects simultaneously, and you can also dispel one of these effects at any time. Water manipulation alterations, 0 ring. Within a selected distance, you can see a body of water occupying 5 cubic feet. You can manipulate it in one of the following ways. Instantly create or alter the flow of water in your chosen direction, changing it by up to 5 feet in any direction. This movement is not powerful enough to cause damage. Give the body of water a simple shape, allowing it to move as you wish. This change lasts for 1 hour. Change the color or transparency of the body of water. The body of water must be altered holistically. This change lasts for 1 hour. Freeze the water, provided there are no living beings within it. The water will thaw within 1 hour. If you cast this spell multiple times, you can maintain up to 2 non-immediate effects simultaneously, and you can also dispel one of these effects at any time. These 4 tricks can control the 4 common natural phenomena of earth, water, wind, and fire, and are all highly practical spells. As the instructor stated in the Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings class, it was recommended to either not learn these 4 spells or learn them all. Gotta listened attentively in class, so he selected all of them at once. Light evocation, 0 ring. You cast this spell on an object no larger than 10 feet in any direction. Before the spell ends, the object will emit a bright light within a 20-foot radius and a faint light within a 20-foot radius beyond it. The color of the light is determined by you. If the object is completely covered by something opaque, its light will be blocked. If you cast the spell again or wish to dispel it, the spell ends. Both light and dance of light are illumination spells, but they differ significantly in function, effect, and usage. Light makes an object glow like a torch, illuminating the surrounding area. Dance of light, on the other hand, is more flexible and versatile, allowing the caster to create multiple light sources within a certain distance. These light sources can manifest as torches, lanterns, or orbs of light and levitate in the air, and they can also move. It seems that the dance of light spell is more practical. However, the light spell also has its advantages. It lasts longer, for several hours, is more effective at illumination, and can also be used for marking. For example, if you find an opportunity to cast a light spell on an enemy's clothing or object, they will either have to abandon their armor or be marked. After careful consideration, Gotta still feels that the longer-lasting light spell might be more practical. Of course, when he has the money, Gotta will eventually acquire the spell recipe for Dance of Light. Finally, there is the high-damage spell Lightning Pull. Lightning Pull, evocation, 0 rings. You create a whip of lightning energy that strikes a visible creature within a range, 15 feet. Depending on its strength, the target will be pulled closer in a straight line. If the target is within 5 feet of you after being pulled closer, it will take lightning damage. If the target is already within 5 feet of you, it will take lightning damage regardless of whether it is pulled closer. As Master Fallon once said in his spell application and combat class, mastering various types of damage spells is one of the most basic requirements to become a qualified and powerful battle mage. Because there are so many types of Leeline creatures, if one is only proficient in 1 or 2 types of damage spells, it's easy to encounter situations where they are countered or unable to counter them. Even in mage duels, there are concepts of counterplay. In the world of mages, especially battle mages, versatility is essential. Therefore, upon seeing the lightning damage spell, Lightning Pull, which he hadn't yet mastered, Gotta didn't hesitate to choose it. After reviewing the 7 spell recipes, Gotta picked up paper and pen and began establishing a Cartesian coordinate system. He then quickly converted the nodes of the 7 spell models into corresponding coordinate arrays to facilitate a subsequent rapid modeling. Chapter 158. Its meaning is self-evident. Have you mastered all 5 level 0 basic runes for today? I looked at Gotta, who had knocked on his door, with an incredulous expression. So I was wondering if I could increase the daily amount of basic rune learning. Gotta earnestly offered his suggestion. Actually, from childhood, his learning habits had always leaned towards self-study. Because what teachers taught in class was too basic, it didn't require much time to master. But this world was different from his previous life. You couldn't just find a bunch of courses and materials by searching online. Knowledge in this world was firmly in the hands of high-level mages. Even money couldn't guarantee you'd buy it, let alone make it publicly available for anyone to learn. Therefore, he could only bother Hizai. Let me see the runes you drew today, Hizai said, his emotion slightly calmer. He needed to confirm that Gotta had indeed mastered the 5 basic runes for today before adding any more tasks for him. Gotta was prepared and handed Hizai a magic paper with the basic runes drawn on it. Hizai took the magic paper and glanced at it, letting out a soft your brushwork is very skillful. He glanced up at Gotta as he spoke. In Hizai's educational philosophy, stability was paramount. He wouldn't belittle his students, as it would affect his mindset and confidence, nor would he easily praise them, fearing it would make them arrogant. Unless, of course, the student had truly excelled. Like now. He had clearly only been studying rune literature for less than 2 months, yet his brushwork was already indistinguishable from that of a seasoned practitioner with 1 or 2 years of experience. And in just a few days, he had reached this level. What about those failed runes? Show them to me too. Don't just throw away those scraps, collect them, study them, and you can learn from them, Hizai earnestly instructed. I understand, Gotta smiled sheepishly, but today I succeeded on the first try, so there were no failed runes. Hizai, over 300 years old, had always been a man of few words, stubbornly silent as a stone. Due to his years of research into rune logic and calculation, and the impression he gave to outsiders was that of an old scholar. At this moment, the usually composed old scholar's voice was louder than ever before. "What did you say? Damn it!" Before Gauda could answer, he couldn't help but swear, but he stopped halfway through, realizing that swearing in front of students would damage his image. However, his inner turmoil urgently needed to be expressed, and his usually taciturn mouth became a machine gun. "That thing hanging in the sky right now, we call it the sun. There was only one, but now, there's a second one. Gauda. Damn it. How did you do that? Learning quickly is one thing, but how can you not make a single mistake? Are you really a newbie?" I had always known that Gauda was talented, very talented, but now he still couldn't understand how he did it. After learning more basic runes, I discovered that all basic runes actually have some similar patterns, and you can deduce some information about new runes from old runes. Gauda thought for a moment and gave his answer. So later on, learning new runes doesn't start from scratch. Instead, it's a combination of some old runes and some new runes, which lowers the learning difficulty and makes learning faster, besides the underlying logic. Runes also share similarities with Chinese characters in terms of information content. For example, in Chinese characters, sounds produced by the mouth are mostly represented by the mouth radical, ha, zai, he. Runes are similar. Runes of the same nature but with different functions generally share this similarity. That's true of runes. Most people need at least a year or two of studying runes to gradually realize this. You've only been studying for less than 2 months, and you've already noticed it. Your insight is very strong, but that's just one thing. It's only because you learn quickly, not because you never make mistakes. Then I don't know. Gauda mentally reviewed his rune drawing process, confirming there were no special techniques, and honestly replied, "I just draw runes according to the rune diagram, relying on my intuition. I just don't know why, but I rarely fail." "You're a fucking genius." I finally couldn't hold back and blurted out the full curse. This wasn't the first time he'd called someone a genius. But this time, the weight of the genius surpassed the last. "Alright, starting today, your daily basic rune learning quota will be increased to 10. I pulled out a few more rune diagrams from the mountain of documents on the table and tossed them to Gauda. "It would be best if you could finish them all. If not, you can leave them for tomorrow. Don't force yourself to finish them. Learning quickly is a skill, but it's not really a skill. Learning deeply and far is the real skill. Even if you're a little slow, it doesn't matter. Do you understand?" "Understood," Gauda replied respectfully, but he didn't completely agree with Hizai's statement. Learning quickly, deeply, and far, that's what real skill is. He inherited the education system from his previous life, a system of rigorous testing and selection from a young age. In that educational environment, learning slowly was a death sentence. If you were a little late in elementary school, you wouldn't get into good junior high school, and if you didn't get into good junior high school, you wouldn't get into good high school, and naturally, a good university would be out of the question. Moreover, it was unrealistic to expect Gauda, who was always very young in both his previous and current lives, to understand late bloomers. Leaving Gavin's building, which housed the rune department, Gauda went to the potions department. Today he wasn't here for class, but to claim his herb field and magical plant seeds. This was part of the assessment for the magical plant cultivation course. He would select a certain number of seeds from the provided list and then plant and cultivate them in the herb field. Finally, his grade in passing the magical plant cultivation course assessment would be judged by the number of surviving magical plants and their condition after survival. Since magical plants require a certain amount of time to grow, the herb field claim and seed cultivation had to begin halfway through the course, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to meet the assessment deadline. These are the seeds you can choose from. After explaining his purpose, a student from the potion department quickly led Gauda to the seed bank for him to choose from. These are seeds for level 0 magical plants, including taro fruit, dawn grass, and frost snowflake. These are seeds for level 1 magical plants, including silver lotus grass and thorn fruit. He briefly introduced the available seeds to Gauda. All were magical plants whose cultivation methods had been learned in the magical plant cultivation course. You can take any of these seeds. There's no limit. The seeds themselves aren't particularly valuable, so there's no limit. For the plant cultivation course, you'll get a perfect score on the assessment if you cultivate 10 healthy Tier 1 magical plants or 30 healthy Tier 0 magical plants. There are only 2 months left until the end of the plant cultivation course. The plant cultivation course spans 4 months, making it a relatively long course. So you should choose some magical plant seeds with short growth cycles, the potion-making student reminded him as he selected seeds. Chapter 159, Divine Guidance Technique. I recommend the taro fruit from the 0-tier magical plants and the thorn fruit from the 1st-tier magical plants, Gata nodded in agreement. These two magical plants are both resilient and have short growth cycles. Then taro fruit and thorn fruit it is. 30 taro fruit seeds and 10 thorn fruit seeds will do. Gata carefully selected the number of seeds, keeping both the 0-tier and 1st-tier seeds just below the maximum score. The two types of magical plants complement each other to ensure a good final score. Okay, the potion-making student efficiently sifted 40 seeds for Gata and divided them into 2 cloth bags. After selecting the seeds, it was time to claim a medicinal field. The medicinal fields available for the magical plant cultivation course are all located in the number 11 medicinal garden, which the Academy specifically designated for assessment. The senior student pulled out a map of the number 11 medicinal garden, showing that the medicinal fields had been artificially divided into nearly 100 plots. A small portion of these plots had already been marked, indicating that they had been claimed. These medicinal fields have only been planted with magical plants a few times, so their fertility is even better. While Gata was selecting medicinal fields, the potion-making student suddenly winked at him and quietly pointed out several fields. Gata was slightly puzzled. He didn't know the students and couldn't figure out where the student's goodwill came from. It couldn't be because he thought the student was kind, could it? Chief Sadie specifically instructed me to help you choose a good field to help you achieve better results, the student added, seemingly noticing Gata's confusion. For members of our mutual aid society, there are always small perks, Gata suddenly understood. As the chief student of the potion-making department, Sadie could easily handle such a small matter. Gata didn't stand on ceremony. After all, he joined the mutual aid society for its resources. He directly claimed the best located field from the ones the student had pointed out. After registering his claim, Gata took 40 seeds to his chosen field. The soil in the herb field had already been cultivated. However, being exposed, it was quite dry. To allow the seeds to absorb more nutrients and grow faster and better after germination, it needed to be dug deeper. But digging too deep would hinder germination, causing the seeds to suffocate in the soil. This delicate balance required Gata to find the right way. Standing before his own herb field, Gata's mind stirred, he took a deep breath, and magical energy began to gather. The next instant, the soil in the herb field became soft and compliant. Clumps of dry soil were easily turned over and moved aside under Gata's will. As Gata continued casting spells, pit after pit quickly appeared in the herb field. A simple application of sculpting earth. 3 days had passed since he purchased 7 spell recipes. In these 3 days, Gata had constructed 2 spell models, one was Divine Guidance, and the other was Sculpting Earth, which he had specifically mastered for this moment. If a mage had to personally go down into the ground to turn the soil, that would be beneath him. With the application of the soil shaping spell, the soil in the herb field has been completely transformed, becoming suitable for cultivation. The topsoil in each hole has been turned up to a depth of about 5 to 7 centimeters. If this were done manually, it would take at least half an hour, and it would be impossible to control it with such precision. Afterwards, Gata sprinkled some fertilizer into the corresponding holes according to the seed variety to further increase fertility and ensure that each seed had enough nutrients to support its early growth. This step was completed using Mage's Hand Plus. Sowing was much simpler. The seeds were scattered in the corresponding holes, and then a layer of fine soil was gently covered with soil shaping to complete the process. Finally, watering was necessary. It was important to ensure that the water could penetrate to the location of the seeds, while avoiding excessive watering and waterlogging. In addition, the watering water also needed to be specially prepared. Gata completed all of these tasks without any problems. He was always very focused during his class. With everything done, today's work was finished. However, he would be busy from now on. He would need to come to the herb field every day to check the soil moisture and seed germination, as well as remove weeds, watch out for pests and diseases, and do a lot of other work. Farming has always been a meticulous task. On the 16th of Frosty month, Gata's first-tier training room usage time in his account was exhausted again. This time, he directly spent 20 gold to secure 80 hours of training room usage time. On the same day, the seeds he planted in the herb field began to sprout one after another. Gauda became even more diligent in visiting the herb field. After the seed sprouted, he had to pay attention to both fertility and the magic absorption of these magical plant seedlings. A major characteristic of magical plants is that, in addition to the fertility required for plant growth, they also need to absorb magic. At the same time, a major difference between magical plants and ordinary herbs is that if there is enough magic, the growth cycle of magical plants will be greatly shortened. On the 21st of Frosty month, Gauda successfully constructed the spell models for all 7 new spells. After this, his spell library had expanded to an astonishing 27 zero-ring spells. He was getting closer and closer to the 35 or more spells required by Betrayal in his graduation design to awaken a super feat. However, while Gauda acknowledged the positive correlation between the number of spells and the strength of awakened feats, he had reservations about the number 35. After all, it was purely a conjecture by Betrayal based on a very small sample size. In Gauda's view, the difficulty of improvement naturally increases with each level, and a direct proportional calculation wouldn't suffice. Therefore, 35 spells weren't a reliable number, and even 40 spells didn't reassure him. Gauda's plan was to expand his spell repertoire to over 45 before advancing to the first rank of Mage. After mastering all 7 new spells, and after some deliberation, Gauda allocated the recently acquired Red-Eyed Sparrow essence to Divine Guidance. Divine Guidance temporarily and slightly enhances performance in a particular skill. This effect, while seemingly just a spell, actually possesses numerous benefits. Especially at Sayre's Academy, learning skills is always a crucial part, making Divine Guidance even more important. And in the end, Wind Spirit Moon Shadow did not disappoint. Gauda Divinity Plus, Prophecy, 0 ring. Select a target and cast this spell to temporarily and slightly increase their performance in the next skill. This includes, but is not limited to, lockpicking success rate, archery accuracy, and item crafting success rate. Additional, the divinity buff will no longer be limited to the next skill, but will last for 1 hour, regardless of how many skills the target performs during this time. Chapter 160 Minor Divine Skill. Frosty Moon 22nd. This afternoon's class was Geography and War Geography of the Nolan continent. As for the morning, Gauda, as usual, first went to the Rune Workshop on the 3rd floor of Gavin Building to learn rune literature and 10 new level 0 basic runes. After reviewing the materials compiled by Hizai several times to ensure a basic understanding, Gauda prepared to begin his rune drawing attempt. However, before putting pen to paper, Gauda cast a Divine Guidance Plus spell on himself to test its effect. Although his rune drawing process already had an extremely low failure rate, it was still only extremely low, not impossible. So, increasing the success rate a little was always good, not a waste. As soon as Divine Guidance Plus was cast on him, a strange, refreshing current emerged in Gauda's mind. It was as if a pool of clear water had washed over Gauda's brain, clearing away distracting thoughts, making his mind more focused, and his thinking much more active than before. This state made Gauda subconsciously exclaim in surprise. So, is the reason why Divine Guidance can improve a target's performance in the next skill due to this strange state of mental clarity and active thinking? That makes sense. Many things have a state of mind. For example, even something as simple as playing basketball can result in 2 completely different states, perfect shooting and missing shots, just a day apart. Without further thought, Gauda didn't waste the duration of Divine Guidance Plus, and began drawing runes. Under the blessing of Divine Guidance Plus, his thinking became exceptionally sharp. The rune diagrams and corresponding deconstructed texts he had previously memorized flooded his mind, smoothly combining and integrating in his mind, becoming interconnected and understood by Gauda. Things that were previously unclear seemed to have been answered now. Inspiration surged, and his mind soared. Gauda took a deep breath and began to draw. When drawing runes, he often had a strange intuition guiding him on how to begin. Hizai called this rune talent. Now, Gauda could clearly feel this intuition growing even stronger. He once again entered a state of undivided focus, completely losing track of time. After a long while, Gauda came to his senses. He put down his rune pen, staring blankly at the table, almost unable to believe his eyes. 10 near-perfect basic runes lay before him on 10 sheets of magic paper, their light shimmering, revealing the rune's magic. Although Gauda's talent and learning methods in rune art resulted in an extremely low failure rate in drawing runes, He had never before drawn all 10 basic runes successfully in one go, without a single failure. And all in such a short time. He could even feel a breakthrough in his brushwork and understanding of runes. Gata was initially stunned, but after a moment of disorientation, his eyes gradually brightened, revealing a look of sudden realization. He had underestimated the power of Divine Guidance Plus. Or rather, his understanding of Divine Guidance Plus had been flawed. Before this, he subconsciously thought that Divine Guidance Plus was just an auxiliary spell used to increase the success rate in practice. But that's not entirely true. The more powerful use of Divine Guidance Plus lies in learning. First, for many things, the most difficult part is going from 0 to 1. Once you have that 1, the rest is just a process of repeated practice and breakthroughs. This is especially true for skill learning. For example, it might take half a year to learn how to concoct a certain potion and successfully concoct it for the first time. But after successfully concocting the potion for the first time, the interval between successfully concocting it for the second time might not even exceed 1 day. Finding that 1 is the difficulty of skill learning. And Divine Guidance can help him achieve that 1 much faster. Another point is the unique effect of Divine Guidance Plus. Under the blessing of Wind Spirit Moon Shadow, Divine Guidance Plus changed from temporarily improving the target's performance in the next skill to no longer limited to the next skill, but lasting for an hour, regardless of how many skill activities the target performs during this time. This allowed the strange state of mental clarity and active thinking brought about by the Divine Guidance technique to last for a full hour. It was no longer limited to a single skill operation. Gata had just experienced it. In this state, efficiency in everything he did was greatly enhanced, as if he had entered a youthful version of the flow state. Opening his mind, this state could indeed effectively improve performance in skill activities, but it wasn't limited to that. Since the effect had changed to last for 1 hour, regardless of how many skill activities were performed, could it also be understood that even without performing skill activities, the effect of the Divine Guidance technique would still exist? This meant that he could also use Divine Guidance Technique Plus for some mentally taxing tasks. For example, learning knowledge. With his mind clear, Gata almost couldn't wait to reopen the learning materials provided by his eye. Drawing 10 basic runes didn't take an hour. The effect of Divine Guidance Technique Plus was still there. He wanted to verify his idea. Sure enough, the knowledge he thought he had already grasped, when read and studied again in this state, made Gata constantly recall the knowledge he had previously understood. Combining the two, some new understandings immediately arose. So that's how it is, Gata murmured, a look of profound understanding spreading across his face. Only when the duration of Divine Guidance Plus ended did Gata come to his senses and put down the documents in his hands. Then, his vision blurred slightly, and he almost fainted. Gata quickly grabbed the table to steady himself, then hurriedly opened his water pouch and gulped down a large mouthful of leak-free fruit drink. A moment later, he recovered. This was a side effect of his brain working at such a high intensity for an hour. His brain, which had never been under such strain, couldn't adapt to the intensity and instinctively activated its defense mechanism, wanting to shut down and hibernate for a while. However, after a few more times, his body would gradually get used to it. Gata rubbed his slightly throbbing temples. Studying is good, but it needs to be done in moderation. Before my body adapts, I shouldn't use Divine Guidance Plus too frequently for learning, otherwise my brain won't be able to handle it, he reminded himself. Although the slight headache and fatigue made him feel a little uncomfortable, the flow state he had just experienced during learning was incredibly addictive, leaving him with a lingering sense of satisfaction. More importantly, isn't this just like a mini enlightenment tea? Gata thought of the classic spiritual items in his previous life's fantasy novels, muttering to himself, this isn't just Divine Guidance Technique Plus, it's clearly a minor divine skill. Looking at it this way, getting first place in credits doesn't seem so difficult after all. Chapter 161 Accumulation. Compared to someone who drinks minor enlightenment tea at any time, what can other students compare in terms of learning? Gata's thinking was it's not that difficult, not because you possess divine skills and was afraid of falling behind other students. It's just that classes require tuition. And each course's tuition fee isn't cheap. 10 gold coins is just the starting price. Whether he can understand multiple courses is something that Divine Guidance Plus can solve. But whether he can afford the tuition for multiple courses is another matter entirely. And that's not within the scope of Divine Guidance Plus. After finishing today's rune literature study, Gauda went to the restaurant and ordered a limited edition specialty dish he hadn't tried in a long time, as a nutritional supplement after overworking his brain. Today's restaurant specialty was grilled shark steak, served with asparagus and sliced tomatoes, and a complimentary dessert, raisin shortbread. It was exotic and flavorful, but this specialty dish cost 12 silver coins. This made Gauda grit his teeth twice before finally deciding to order a meal. After finishing his meal, there was still some time before his afternoon class, Geography and War Geography of the Nolan continent, began. Gauda first returned to his dormitory, took out the materials he had compiled for the courses Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings, and General Knowledge of Verbs, and sat down in his meditation room. Having recovered much of his energy, Gauda took a deep breath, cast a Divine Guidance Plus spell on himself, and then focused his attention on the materials. Soon, he once again entered that state of mental clarity and active thinking. In this state, time seemed to slow down. Only the various knowledge points of the two courses flowed through his mind as he continuously flipped through the materials. Time passed second by second. An hour later, Gauda, looking exhausted, put down the materials, took out his water pouch, and gulped down another mouthful of leak-free fruit drink. Corresponding to his tired expression was an immense sense of satisfaction and joy within him. In just 1 hour, Gauda felt he had remembered and understood more than he had in the previous half-month. Of course, in his previous life, there was a magical existence called university students who could learn more in a day or two than in a whole semester, provided they were before the final exams, but Gauda's situation was different. He had already studied very thoroughly and diligently before achieving this miraculous effect. First in freshman credits, he suddenly felt that this achievement, which he had once considered a short-term goal, was somewhat insignificant. Because it had become too easy. Things that are too easy to accomplish are not suitable as goals. He took out his pocket watch and glanced at it. It was only 12:30 p.m. The afternoon classes didn't start until 2 p.m. Having used Divine Guidance Plus twice to enter a flow state, Gauda no longer forced himself to endure it and chose to go to bed for a nap to recover his energy. Frosty Moon 23rd. Gauda knocked on Hizai's door again, and under Hizai's incomprehensible and skeptical gaze, he proactively requested to double his daily study load. Later that day, during the inspection, he completely won over the skeptical Hizai with an absolutely perfect performance. On the 27th of the Frosty Moon, with a dual blessing of the first-tier training room and the leakless water, Gauda's guidance technique achieved its third minor breakthrough since entering the Seer's Academy. After this breakthrough, his total mana was sufficient to support him casting 11 spells in one go. At this rate of cultivation, Gauda roughly estimated that he would reach perfection in the apprentice guidance technique in about another year. By then, he would be only 14 or 15 years old. Could he be considered a genius? Of course, this kind of genius should be prefixed with pseudo. Such pseudo-geniuses are especially numerous among nobles. Because the resources enjoyed by noble mages are certainly far superior to those of Gauda. Even a mage with Gauda's mediocre talent could quickly push his guidance technique cultivation progress to the maximum by earning resources on his own, so it was even less of a problem for noble mages. Then why did a 14-year-old first-ring mage like Yulan still shock so many people? The reason isn't complicated. While the guidance method allows for rapid progress with the help of resources, there's no shortcut to meditation. Methods for improving meditation training are rare. Even noble mages have to rely on themselves. Therefore, for noble children, with sufficient resources, it's common to reach perfection in the apprentice guidance method between the ages of 13 and 15. However, there are many examples of those who, due to lagging meditation progress, only reach the third-rank apprentice mage level after the age of 20. But for Gauda, this problem isn't so difficult. His talent for meditation far surpasses his talent for guidance method. Therefore, even if meditation slows him down after perfecting guidance method, it won't be for too long. Frosty Moon 28th. Gauda arrived at Building 17 in the 1st District. This was Jellica's dormitory. Courses at Seer's Academy mostly start at the beginning of each month, rarely at the end. So even though he currently has plenty of time and energy, Gauda has no classes to choose from and needs to wait until the Frozen Moon arrives. Before that, he must acquire enough money to pay for his upcoming courses. Gauda's savings are only 63 gold and 8 silver, insufficient to support his ambitions, Obtaining a large sum of money quickly through academy missions is clearly impossible. After much deliberation, Gaode realized that for his current situation, there was only one way out: selling leak-free water. Although the leak-free fruit drink would be quite helpful to Gaode, converting it into cash would be far more profitable in the current circumstances. The only channels Gaode could think of for selling leak-free water were Sadie and Angelica. The former were both members of the Mutual Aid Association and should be easy to talk to. However, gaining their trust was a challenge, and members of the Mutual Aid Association might not have the spare money to buy such a useful but not essential fruit drink. Considering all this, Gaode abandoned Sadie as a potential channel. The latter, firstly, had already experienced the wonders of leak-free water and had even made a transaction, making her a regular customer, requiring no further explanation, convenient and hassle-free. Secondly, Jerica is wealthy. She's a true rich heiress. Only someone with enough money would be willing to buy something as non-essential as leak-free water. So, after gathering his remaining leak-free fruit drink, Gaode paid Jerica his first visit. 2 gallons of leak-free water, after brewing, yielded approximately 2 gallons and 4 pints, about 12 liters, of fruit drink. To fully utilize the effects of leak-free water, one needs to drink 7 ounces, about 0.2 liters, of fruit drink per day. More won't enhance the effects. 1 gallon is equivalent to 8 pints. Gaode had consumed about 6 pints of fruit drink in the past few days, leaving 14 pints. Assuming 1 serving per day, this can be considered 42 servings. He had previously given Jerica a small jug containing nearly a pint of fruit drink, for which she paid 10 gold coins. Roughly calculated, if he could sell all 14 pints of the remaining drink to Jerica, it would bring him around 140 gold coins. Chapter 162 The King of Scrolls. When Jerica opened the door and saw God standing there, she was immediately surprised. It had been almost 3 months since she enrolled, and this was the first time God had visited her. She knew a little about God's situation. As soon as he became a formal student, he enrolled in 8 courses and was studying diligently. Jerica was secretly astonished by this. She had originally only intended to casually choose 1 or 2 courses, easily getting through the first year and focusing most of her energy on advancing to first ring mage. However, after learning how hard God was working, Jerica felt too embarrassed to simply lie back, and after some hesitation, she chose 4 courses. Although she voluntarily chose 4 courses, Jerica had a strange feeling that she was being forced to work hard, a strange feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on. If God knew Jerica's thoughts, he would surely kindly describe this feeling for her. It's called, Gordon, is there something you need from me? Jerica asked proactively. Seeing that Jerica was also relieved, Gaode knew that the students in the academy were all busy with their own things and didn't have much time to stay home, and he was afraid of making a wasted trip. Jerica, do you still need the fruit drink from last time? I brewed some more, and added some precious ingredients. Now they won't evaporate in a short time and can be stored for a long time, Gaode said bluntly. As for the so-called precious ingredients, they were actually just seasonal fruits. Gaode said this to further enhance the value of the fruit drink and also to cover up the previous claim of volatile ingredients. The fruit drink from last time, Jerica's eyes lit up, and she invited, come in and talk, don't stand at the door. Seeing that Jerica didn't refuse and even invited him to come in for a detailed discussion, Gaode knew that the matter was most likely settled. After sitting down in the chair in the hall, Jerica's expression became formal, switching to business mode. How much fruit drink can you provide this time? It won't be just a small pot like last time, will it? Can you provide it long term? She asked in quick succession. Gaode shook his head and answered in turn, I made a little more this time, about 14 pints, however, I can't supply it long term. First, the brewing process for this fruit drink is extremely complicated and takes a lot of time. I can't waste too much time on this. There are many more important things to do at the academy. Secondly, brewing this fruit drink requires several special ingredients that can't be bought outside, and I don't have many of them on hand. I see. Jerica's mind raced, and she added, fortunately, 14 pints is a good amount, enough for me to drink for a while. If your family's recipe could be mass-produced, it would definitely make a fortune. What a pity. Anyway, I'll take all 14 pints of the fruit drink. If there's any more produced after that, just come to me, I'll buy it without limit, Jerica said with a smile. 14 pints, I'll round it up for you, how about 150 gold? Her rich heiress air was evident in just a few words. Gaode, without any hesitation, immediately nodded in agreement. "I'll bring you the fruit drink in a bit," Gata said, beaming. By the way, this fruit drink is called the leak-free fruit drink. He had given his fruit drink, brewed with leak-free water, a name on the spot. Leak-free fruit drink, Jerica nodded, indicating she remembered. "Wait a moment, I'll settle the payment for you first." Back in his dormitory, Gata put his newly received 150 gold coins together with his existing savings. The 213 Shan gold coins gleamed with an alluring golden light, the little rooster engraved on the coins looking spirited and proud. Gata stroked the 200-plus gold coins with obvious affection. Soon, a large portion of them would no longer belong to him. The thought of this made him feel a pang of regret. And thinking about transferring all the leak-free fruit drink to Jerica made him feel even more pained. But it was all worth it. With these 150 gold coins in his account, at least for the first academic year, Gata wouldn't have to worry too much about expenses. With all his savings in hand, Gata left District 1 and went to the course selection counter at the committee. Course selection, Gata handed his ID badge to the elderly staff member in a long robe. "What course do you want?" The old man was already very familiar with the work process. He took out his ID badge without looking up, swiped it on the alchemy machine next to him to confirm his information. Then, he looked down and flipped through the course schedule, preparing to record the course Gata had chosen. Magic ink extraction and production, Gata said. This was a branch course under runeology. To draw runes, 2 tools are necessary, a rune pen and magic ink. Making rune pens was alchemy, and Gata had no interest in getting involved. Of the 3 major schools of alchemy, Gata was very interested in runeology and potions, but he really had no interest in alchemy. A crude blacksmith was not to be associated with. As for magic ink, it was generally made by the rune master himself, which was a basic skill for rune masters, just like a chef is definitely proficient in grocery shopping. "Alright, registered you." The old man took out his ID badge, preparing to return it to Gata. "Anything else?" Gata quickly stopped him. "Anything else?" The old scholar, who had worked at the course selection counter for decades, frowned. In the alchemy machine, he could see that Gata already had 8 courses under his name, not yet finished. If he selected 2 more courses, that would be 10 courses. Could he manage them all? Although he knew that Gata was taking extra courses under these circumstances, it meant he had plenty of time. But a freshman taking 10 courses at the same time still seemed a bit exaggerated to the old scholar. In all his years of doing course selection, he had honestly seen very few people like this. Merchant Guild Management and Trade Practice, this was a branch course under the Basic Culture course, a cultural course that any mage who planned to work in a merchant guild would take. Okay, before the old scholar could finish speaking, Gata spoke again. Racial history, this was also a branch course under the Basic Culture course. Ah, the old scholar subconsciously let out a surprised sound. Legion Biology Research, Magical Engineering, Magical Medicine, Pharmacological Research, and Pet Training. Gata rattled off all the courses he had pre-selected. These courses covered a wide range of topics. Racial history primarily studies the various native races and their histories in the known Mage planes. It's a branch of the Basic Culture course. Legion Biology Research, as the name suggests, is a course dedicated to the study of Legion creatures, including their structure, supernatural abilities, characteristics, and lineage. Magical Engineering mainly studies the knowledge and techniques of surveying, designing, constructing, and maintaining various projects using magic. Magical Medicine studies the treatment of various diseases using magic. Pharmacological Research understands the properties of various medicines and the changes that occur when these properties are combined. This course is a branch of potions, and one of the required courses in potions. Furthermore, completing this course helps in deducing and verifying prescriptions. Gata also harbored the idea of completing the complete prescription for the spirit potion when he had the chance, so he chose this course even though he hadn't selected potions. As for why he didn't choose potions, the reason was simple. Learning potions required a large amount of money to purchase raw materials for potion concoction. He couldn't afford it right now. In fact, if it weren't for his eye constantly providing him with free magical ink and paper, the cost of materials for learning runecraft alone would have further exacerbated Gata's already meager financial situation. Pet Training, on the other hand, was a course that studied the characteristics and laws of life activities such as the composition, morphology, habits, reproduction, and historical development of pets. There were a total of 8 courses, Completing them would give Gauda a full 12 credits, perfectly offsetting the credit disadvantage caused by Yulan's initial level as a one-ring mage. After Gauda recited the course names like a menu, the old scholar, who had been looking down at the timetable, suddenly raised his head, his eyes wide, staring intently at Gauda. "Is there a problem?" Gauda asked. "You want to choose 8 more courses?" He wondered if he had misheard, or if the young man in front of him had lost his mind. This wasn't ordering food, it was choosing courses. Besides, even ordering food, 8 dishes at once would be enough to overeat. Is that not allowed? Gauda had never heard of a limit on the number of courses one could choose. "No problem, that's good. Here's the course fee." Gauda reluctantly took out his money pouch, poured out 120 Shan gold coins, and pushed it over. The staff member hadn't quite processed what was happening. He mechanically accepted Gauda's tuition fee, registered it, and returned the ID badge to Gauda. Throughout the entire process, he seemed lost in thought. Only after Gauda left did he come to his senses. 8 plus 8, 16 courses simultaneously, the old man murmured. Not only had he never seen a student like this in his entire career, but he doubted there were many such students in the entire history of the academy. What kind of student was this? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163 Yulan. Gauda had considered that taking 16 courses at once might seem a bit outrageous. However, he did it anyway. First, the act itself wouldn't attract any covetousness. If his mage level had increased too quickly, illogically and without any discernible clues, he would have had to worry. Because there would always be those with ulterior motives who thought he might have obtained some treasure or cultivation secrets, and would try every means to coerce or bribe him to get it out of him. But he was only demonstrating an unusually strong learning ability, so there was no big deal. Learning ability is inherently unpredictable and illogical. Others could only envy or be jealous, and there was nothing they could do. Second, the rules of Seer's Academy were clearly credits are king. He now had the ability to obtain more credits, but why wouldn't he use them to bide his time? Would that be foolish? Moreover, cultivating a genius persona would also bring many advantages. There would certainly be some drawbacks, but overall, the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. Most importantly, even without considering the pros and cons, Gauda would have done it anyway, driven by his personality. In his previous life, he had been a top student since childhood. However, the speed at which the selection of 16 courses at once caused a stir exceeded Gauda's expectations. Moreover, the first person to challenge him was someone Gauda hadn't anticipated. "Don't you still have 8 courses to finish? Why did you choose 8 more? Are you crazy? Even if you're talented, you can't push yourself so hard, it'll only backfire." As soon as Gauda entered the rune workshop, he faced a questioning from Hizai, who had been waiting for him. As the head of the rune department, Hizai Okenli, even if he was ostracized, still had this kind of information. "These courses aren't even close to draining my energy yet." Facing Hizai, Gauda could only make up an excuse. "Of the 8 courses I chose earlier, only your rune literature course was a little challenging, the others were quite easy for me, requiring almost no effort. I only chose 8 new courses after 2 months of classes, getting familiar with the situation and confirming I had the capacity." Gauda's words sounded lengthy, but they boiled down to 5 words: "I'm exceptionally talented." However, the person in the entire academy who knew Gauda's talent best was Hizai. He recalled Gauda's talent in rune literature and ultimately couldn't refute Gauda's claim of exceptional talent. If Gauda's talent in other courses was also like his in rune literature, then even a dozen courses wouldn't be much of a burden for him. After all, Gauda's current workload in rune literature was already more than 10 times that of other mages of the same level. Then you'll have to manage it yourself. Don't let it interfere with your rune literature studies. The knowledge from other courses isn't worthless, but it's still inferior to rune literature, Hizai said helplessly. He was actually very indulgent towards Gauda, basically not interfering with any of Gauda's ideas. Because Hizai understood that with Gauda's talent in rune literature, setting too many rules and rigid paths for him would only limit his growth. The news of Gauda taking 16 courses simultaneously was only circulating within a small circle and hadn't yet reached the students' ears. But it was only a matter of time. However, Gauda didn't care about that. So what if he received attention? It was good for these students to experience what the pressure of a top student was like. Frozen Moon, Day 1. 2 of the 8 courses Gauda newly selected started today. Magical Medicine in the morning and Pharmacological Research in the afternoon. Both were courses that Gauda was very interested in. Magical Medicine was a course that combined theory and practice. Pharmacological Research, on the other hand, focused on theoretical knowledge, which was also the type of course that Gauda was best at. In the flow state enhanced by Divine Guidance Plus, even the most obscure theoretical knowledge becomes simple, clear, and understandable. In the afternoon, in the Pharmacology Research classroom, the large room was filled with over 30 students. Pharmacology research was a required branch of potions, and potions has always been the most popular magical art, so the large number of students was not surprising. Everyone, I am your instructor for the upcoming Pharmacology Research class. A middle-aged mage with a square face and a long beard introduced himself to the students in a calm tone. However, Gauda was not paying attention to this at the moment. From the moment he entered the classroom, he had a feeling of being constantly watched. It was as if someone in the classroom was watching him. He had been searching for the source of this feeling for a long time, and now he finally found it. It was a short, dark-skinned boy sitting in the corner. Gauda didn't recognize him, but for some reason, this person kept staring at him. Gauda seized an opportunity, turning to meet the short student's gaze when the latter glanced at him again. Normally, the other person would look away nervously in this situation. Unexpectedly, the short student didn't flinch, staring directly into Gauda's eyes. Gauda saw a strong sense of provocation in the student's gaze. However, it wasn't quite that extreme, not quite a provocation. Perhaps declaration of war would be a more accurate description? Who is this person? Gauda frowned slightly, unable to figure it out, and finally withdrew his attention. Listening to the lecture was important. The flow state of Divine Guidance Plus did indeed grant him an almost superhuman learning speed. However, the prerequisite was that he listened attentively and mastered the basic knowledge. What use was even the most active mind if he hadn't listened attentively and his mind was blank? The 2-hour pharmacology research class ended, and Gauda got up to leave. Unexpectedly, the short boy didn't give up, standing up and blocking Gauda's path. This action immediately attracted the attention of the other students in the classroom. Everyone seemed quite interested in the short boy. "God," the short boy said, standing in front of Gauda. "And you are?" Gauda frowned. "Don't pretend, you can't possibly not recognize me," the short student said, raising his head high. "Who is this guy?" Gauda asked helplessly. "Are you famous?" The short student was silent for a moment, seemingly unsure how to respond. Admitting he was famous felt a bit shameful, but denying it felt wrong. He thought for a moment and finally introduced himself. "My name is Yulan." The name sounded familiar. Gauda thought carefully and finally remembered who it was. It was that 14-year-old first-ring mage genius. "What do you want with me?" Gauda asked seriously. He didn't care how talented Yulan was, and besides, even a genius couldn't be kept from get out of class. "My instructor originally said I should spend as much time and energy as possible learning magic." Yulan's instructor was the head of the spell department, so this suggestion wasn't surprising. "So I originally planned to focus on learning magic in my first year, and I didn't really care about being first in credits among freshmen. I'm already a first-ring mage, I don't need the ascension water anymore, so giving it to you is fine. Consider it a gesture of good character." "But," Yulan paused, then suddenly said, "I heard from Sadie that you said you wanted to surpass me in credits. If that's what you're saying, then I'm not going to give it up. This first place in credits among freshmen will only be given to you by me. It's not something you can snatch from me," Yulan said, emphasizing each word. "If you change your mind now, I might give you a chance." Was this excessive pride? Gauda sighed helplessly. He had encountered people like this in his previous life, from humble backgrounds but with excellent grades, hence their arrogance and inferiority complex. Because their only asset was their grades, they valued the empty title of grades immensely. "Oh, I see," Gauda nodded in response. "First place in credits is based on merit, there's no need to give it up," he said seriously. Compared to Yulan's aggressive demeanor, Gauda appeared remarkably calm. This contrast made a difference immediately apparent. Yulan clearly noticed this as well, and the onlookers of the other students only made the usually arrogant Yulan blush. "I heard from the instructor that you took 16 courses in one go to try and surpass me in credits." In her shame and indignation, Yulan gritted her teeth and said, "But you can't just attend courses and get credits, you have to pass the exams, 16 courses? There's no way you can finish them all, surpassing me in credits is even more impossible." Chapter 164 The first person in building a good academic atmosphere. "Thank you for your concern," Gowda replied after a moment's thought. "I will try my best to pass all the course assessments." He could tell that Yulan was simply overly proud. Aside from that, he didn't seem to have any ill intentions towards him. Therefore, he had no need or intention to further provoke Yulan. Besides, before entering the academy, Yulan had always been a wild mage, a self-taught individual, and given his young age, it was normal for him to be impetuous. After receiving formal mage training from his mentor for a while, when he looked back on this experience, he would probably be ashamed to look at it, wishing he could seal it away as a dark history. Who hasn't been a bit immature in their youth? But Gowda's composed and unassuming attitude was precisely what made Yulan most uncomfortable at this moment. Continuing to make threats would make him seem petty and troublesome. Ending it here would feel like an anticlimactic ending. "Just wait and see, I'll definitely be number 1 in freshman credits this time." Yulan's flushed face didn't fade, and under the gazes of the other students, she became even more flustered. She could only utter these words before leaving with her head held high. Gowda shook his head helplessly. But it was understandable. A 14-year-old boy who had already advanced to the first ring before even entering the academy, and was immediately accepted as a student by the head of the spell department, was bound to be a little arrogant. With those blocking his way gone, Gowda naturally had no reason to linger and turned to leave the classroom. Yulan's sudden appearance had the biggest effect of spreading the news that Gowda was taking 16 courses simultaneously, a news that would normally take some time to spread among the students, quickly throughout the academy due to the presence of nearly 30 students. This made Gowda experience once again the feeling of being constantly stared at by other students on the street. The last time was when he broke the entrance mission record. However, that last time, such attention disappeared after less than a week because there was no follow-up. It was like an interesting piece of gossip, entertaining everyone for a moment and then gone. But this time, it won't end so quickly. Everyone wants to know what happens next. Everyone wants to know how many courses this arrogant freshman, who simultaneously enrolled in 16 courses but actually gained entry through recommendation letters, will ultimately pass. And who will be the top freshman in terms of credits. After all, Yulan has already declared war on him. Gowda returned to his residence. He organized the materials from the courses he had taken over the past few days, including textbooks and some notes, and then moved into his meditation room. After calming his mind, Gowda silently cast a Divine Guidance Plus spell on himself. The next moment, a cool breeze rushed into his mind, cleansing his spirit. In an instant, Gowda, entering a state of flow, felt his thinking become active. He opened the materials and began reading word by word. At this moment, the obscure and difficult knowledge accumulated in his mind from the previous courses suddenly became clear and understandable. The knowledge points began to connect with each other, a detail Gowda had never noticed before. Gowda could even draw inferences from one instance to another, summarizing his experiences. He gradually became immersed in this deep learning, and before he knew it, he had already gone through the materials for one course. Then, Gowda immediately opened the materials for another course. Time ticked by. It wasn't until an indescribable feeling of exhaustion washed over him, replacing the refreshing sensation, that Gowda came back to his senses. The effects of Divine Guidance Plus had worn off. There were still some materials he hadn't finished reading, but Gowda didn't continue. 2 consecutive hours in a state of flow would leave him completely drained. He stretched and got up to head to the academy's cafeteria. After such intense energy expenditure, he desperately needed to replenish his energy. Because it was lunchtime, the cafeteria was busier than usual. Gowda bought a simple set meal for 5 copper coins and chose an empty seat. But he had barely started eating when someone with a dinner that was clearly much more elaborate than his sat down in the empty seat opposite him. "You're spending all your earnings on course selection, you can't even afford a decent meal." Gowda looked up and saw it was Jerica. "No, it's just that I have too many classes, I basically don't have time to do academy missions to earn money. I can only live off my savings for now, but I still need to save some money for cultivation, so I'm saving wherever I can." He spoke honestly, without the slightest embarrassment. "I heard you're currently taking 16 courses at the same time," Jerica asked. This news had already spread, But Jerica still felt it was too unbelievable, so she wanted to confirm it again. Yes, Gouda nodded, forked a potato from his plate, and put it in his mouth. Are you competing with Yulan for first place in credits? To be precise, he's competing with me. I just want to be first in credits. I don't necessarily have to compete with anyone. If you have more credits, then I'm competing with you for first place in credits, not Yulan, Gouda added. Well, luckily I wasn't hardworking enough to pose a threat to you, right? Jerica took a vicious bite of her steak upon hearing this, and after a while, said, Yulan has chosen 4 more courses, bringing his total to 7, not bad, God praised sincerely. Before mastering Divine Guidance Plus, he had only chosen 8 courses. You should know you're famous now, Jerica asked through gritted teeth, seeing that God's reaction was completely different from what she had imagined. Yes, God nodded. As his conversation with Yalan in the classroom gradually spread, the entire academy became quite a buzz. Someone actually dared to choose 16 courses at the same time and compete with a 14-year-old first-ring Mage freshman for the highest credit score? Everyone who heard this news thought Gouda had gone mad. But Gouda wasn't crazy. He acted perfectly normal, diligently attending classes and practicing every day, appearing quite serious, which only drew more attention. He really seemed to be doing it right, and everyone wanted to see just how capable he was. This was the thought process of most people following the matter. No student would ever take 16 courses simultaneously, because with normal energy, it's impossible to manage so many. Right now, not only students, but many instructors are waiting to see how many courses you can pass. There are even betting odds on who will be the top freshman in terms of credits this year. Jerica revealed a lot of information. This was all unknown to Gouda, who had almost no social life within the academy. What are the odds? Gouda suddenly asked. Jerica clearly hadn't expected that after all she'd said. Gouda's only concern would be this. She paused for a moment before replying, Yulan is 1-1, you are 1-4. The betting odds were quite rational. Even though they didn't think highly of Gouda, they didn't set his odds to an outrageous multiple. Jerica, you're probably the student I'm closest to in the academy, Gouda suddenly said seriously. Huh? This unexpected turn of events left Jerica momentarily stunned. Gouda, who had already finished his meal, stood up. As the saying goes, don't let the good stuff go to outsiders, so, remember to put some on my plate, he grinned, leaving Jerica with a sunny smile. Before Jerica could react, Gouda had already turned and left. After finishing dinner, Jerica stopped at the restaurant entrance, hesitating for a moment. She needed to spend time preparing for her advancement to first-ring Mage, and didn't have much time or energy for studying. So Jerica had always planned to just get 10 credits before successfully advancing. Later, because of Gouda's extra credits, she voluntarily chose 4 courses. But now Gouda had added more credits, directly choosing 16 courses, and Yulan had also chosen 7. As fellow freshmen, seeing how hard they were working, she felt embarrassed to continue like this. No matter what, she entered Sears Academy with the highest honors, so she still had some baggage to carry. She couldn't fall too far behind the other 2, could she? Having thought this through, Jerica finally made up her mind, took a step, and turned to walk towards the committee. She was going to add extra classes for herself. Committee, Chairman's Office. Susan, who had served as chairman for 23 years, opened the documents submitted by her staff as usual and began reviewing them. At the beginning of the month, the main focus was on the attendance rate of each course. Courses with consistently low attendance rates were either problematic due to issues with the instructors or the course content itself, and would be considered for cancellation. Courses with higher attendance rates, on the other hand, would be considered for adding 1 or 2 more sessions. At Sears Academy, it wasn't easy to be a student, and it wasn't so easy to be an instructor either. One had to ensure their courses were sufficiently attractive to students, or they would be eliminated. Chairman Susan, as she flipped through the documents, couldn't help but frown slightly, as if she had discovered something surprising. Chapter 165 Composite Runes. Su Sang flipped through the documents for a long time but couldn't find anything. Finally, he put down the documents, thought for a moment, and called over the staff member in charge of scheduling the courses. Why has the attendance rate for all courses in the academy increased so much recently, especially for basic courses, even by 40% or 50%? Chairman Su Sang asked directly, have you taken any new measures? Normally, The attendance rate for all courses in the academy fluctuates within a fixed range, and it's rare to see such a large change. In his opinion, it's highly likely that the staff below have done their job well. Improving the academic atmosphere has always been one of the committee's key tasks, and seeing such remarkable results, he, as the chairman, was quite satisfied. The staff member being questioned scratched his head somewhat awkwardly. "No, we haven't implemented any new measures." "Then what is it?" Su Sang raised an eyebrow and continued to ask. "It's just that the new students we recruited this time are all working too hard," the staff member said weakly. In the past, new students entered the academy with predetermined Mage level credits, so they only needed to take 1 or 2 courses in their first year to reach the required 10 credits. There wasn't much pressure, and the average number of courses they took was only 3, but this year, the staff member paused, then sighed, "It's only been 3 months, and many new students have only just completed their enrollment tasks, yet they've already taken an average of 3 courses, equivalent to a whole year's worth for new students in previous years. This hard work from the new students has indirectly boosted the enthusiasm of some older students." Su Sang suddenly realized why the basic courses had the highest attendance rates. It turned out the main force was the new students. New students could only take basic courses. "The new students recruited this time are of good character," Su Sang praised. "Mainly because there's a catfish," the staff member said. "Catfish? Who is it?" As the chairman of the committee and one of the highest-ranking mages in the academy, Su Sang didn't actually know much about what was happening below. What reached him were usually important matters. No one would gossip about them to him. "It's Gouda," the staff member explained in detail about the competition between Gouda and Yulan. His 16 course selections caused Yulan to also select 7 courses in order to secure the top credit score. Then, Jellica wasn't to be outdone, also selecting 7 courses. With these 3 ahead of them, the remaining new students couldn't fall too far behind, and more or less added 1 or 2 courses each. A second-class mage apprentice competing with Yulan for the top credit score. Su Sang smiled, picked up the teacup on the table, and slowly took a sip of tea. And simultaneously selecting 16 courses, it wasn't a satisfied smile, but a smile born of anger. He still had some impression of Gouda, a country bumpkin whom others called a lucky bastard. Su Sang didn't have any objection to Gouda's country bumpkin background, because he himself had entered Seer's Academy as a commoner and had worked his way up step by step through his own efforts. He wasn't particularly opposed to being admitted through recommendation letters. After all, there were so many noble students in the academy who got in through family connections. But now, Su Sang's opinion of Gouda had plummeted. He hated 2 types of students most of all: those who entered the academy through family background or personal talent but didn't cherish its resources, spending their days idly. The other type was pretentious, putting on a show of hard work for outsiders, but in reality, it was all an act, and they hadn't learned anything. Especially the latter, who didn't understand that hard work was for themselves, not for show. And now, Su Sang categorized Gouda into the second type. After all, Gouda's behavior, from a common-sense perspective, was nothing short of attention-seeking. He was showing off now, but wouldn't his true colors be revealed during the final assessment? All the attention he was getting now would have to be returned then. What was the point? Let him be. Anyway, he was the one delaying his own progress. At least he indirectly improved the academy's academic atmosphere, so it wasn't entirely meaningless. Su Sang's eyebrows twitched, and he waved his hand, saying, "Okay, I understand. Frozen Moon, Day 8. After 2 breakthroughs in his guiding technique, Gouda's meditation technique finally improved as well. On this day, he successfully manifested the 10th lotus petal. Normally, even though Gouda's talent in meditation far surpassed his talent in guiding technique could be aided by many external aids, so its progress would be much faster. The reason he could barely keep up now was because frequently entering a flow state through Divine Guidance Plus also stimulated his mental strength to some extent. This was an unexpected gain for Gouda. Although the stimulation wasn't particularly significant, it was better than nothing. On the 11th of the Frozen Moon, with the assistance of Divine Guidance Plus, Gouda completed learning all 651 Level 0 basic runes. Mastering all Level 0 basic runes, that's already part of the assessment for the second stage of rune literature. His eye sighed, speaking frankly to Gouda. Your current level is equivalent to a veteran student who has studied runes for 2 years, While you've only been studying runes for 2.5 months, the veteran student I referred to was one who had been selected and possessed talent in rune literature. In fact, for an ordinary person, it would probably take 10 years to reach Gauda's current level. Gauda didn't realize how exaggerated this was. He knew he had some talent for runic writing, but he attributed most of it to divine guidance plus. Next, your learning will focus on the combination of compound runes. I will first teach you 36 classic compound runes, but these are just templates. The composition of compound runes is undefined. Each rune master has their own summary and their own preferred compound runes, and compound runes are where the difference between rune masters begins. A good rune master can, according to needs, use the fewest basic runes and the most concise structure to create the clearest, most understandable, and easiest to understand compound runes. At the same time, the compound runes they create will also have good maintainability, making them easy for other rune masters to maintain later. High efficiency, a concise structure and design allowed good rune masters to create compound runes with lower energy consumption. While poor rune masters often create compound runes with unnecessary basic runes, wasting mana. High scalability. A good composite rune must have a flexible structure, allowing it to connect better with other composite runes to form a magic circle. Inferior rune artists often struggle to combine them with other runes. High security, high performance. After a long explanation, I took out a stack of rune diagrams and handed them to Gauda. These 36 classic composite runes perfectly meet these criteria. The first step in learning is imitation. Master these 36 classic composite runes and try to deconstruct and understand their design principles. Once you feel you've grasped them sufficiently, I'll give you a challenge. Then, based on my requirements, you'll design your own composite runes. Chapter 166 Final Assessment. Besides the 36 classic composite rune diagrams, I also prepared a stack of materials nearly half a person's height for Gauda. All of these materials combined constituted the entirety of the knowledge points for the third and fourth stages of the rune literature course. Gauda had mastered the first 2 stages, which originally required 2 years, in just 2.5 months. I secretly wondered how long Gauda would need to master the knowledge for the third and fourth stages. Especially since his chosen teaching method was rather unreliable, he only provided the materials, leaving everything else to Gauda's self-study. But this wasn't because I was irresponsible. The fundamental reason was that education is inherently a contradictory thing. Take the field of rune literature as an example. Anyone who wants to develop in rune literature without systematic education is likely to take many detours, or even go astray. Even if they eventually get back on track, they've wasted precious time, and in the end, they might not have enough life to explore the more advanced knowledge of rune literature. The latter, needless to say, is simply a complete waste. However, if the education received is too systematic, relying too much on the theories and experiences of mentors and predecessors, one often becomes a craftsman without independent thinking ability in the later stages. All a craftsman can do is simply draw magic arrays according to blueprints. The balance here is crucial, and not only the mentor but also the student needs to grasp it. Fortunately, Gauda's talent was sufficient, so his mentor, could be lazy but confidently entrust everything to Gauda's self-study, only providing knowledge and answering questions. This educational method would be misleading for others, but it was perfectly suitable for Gauda. Gauda had no objections. He was a self-taught person, and this allowed him to adjust his learning pace according to his own situation without wasting time. Time passed day by day. Life in the academy always flies by, especially when your life is filled with various things. You'll find time passes even faster. This was especially true for Gauda. After selecting 16 courses, he had at least 2 classes every day. Meanwhile, those studying rune literature dedicate time to their studies every day. Their cultivation time is fixed and cannot be reduced. To outsiders, this lifestyle seems inhuman, more like that of a machine. But for Gauda, the feeling of gaining knowledge every day brings him immense satisfaction. This satisfaction largely masks his fatigue. After the initial turmoil at the beginning of the month, Frozen Moon gradually returned to calm. The waves seemed to have subsided, but the undercurrents were still brewing. At least half the students were waiting to see how this year's freshmen would fare, waiting to see how many courses the madman Gauda would pass and how many credits he would earn. Amidst this subtle attention, Frozen Moon quietly drew to a close. The end of Frozen Moon was somewhat special. At Sears Academy, Large courses like rune literature spanned an entire academic year in a single phase, but the smaller courses generally didn't last as long. Most smaller courses lasted 3 months, with the longest being 6 months. Of the 8 courses Goethe initially chose, 3 were compulsory, plus a major course called rune literature. The remaining 4 were specialized courses. Except for plant cultivation, which required students to cultivate magical plants and spanned 4 months, the other 3 specialized courses, Geography of the Nolan Continent and War Geography, General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings, Introduction, and General Herbal Knowledge, each lasted a standard 3 months. The final assessments were all scheduled for the end of the month. In other words, Goethe was about to experience his first exam week at Sears Academy. The first exam was for General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings, Introduction, a purely theoretical and easy course. The assessment format was also simple. The Academy would provide a test, and students taking the course would answer it within an hour. On the morning of the 30th of the frozen moon, the examination room arranged by the Academy was packed with students. This easy course consistently ranked among the most popular in the Academy. All participants in this assessment, please place your identification badges in the upper left corner of your desks for inspection. This is a closed book exam. Anyone found cheating will be dealt with severely and handed over to the committee. We hope you will not make such a fundamental mistake. An unfamiliar old mage entered the classroom with a stack of exam papers, gave a brief explanation of the exam rules, and then nodded to a staff member beside him. The staff member understood, took out a small alchemy machine, and began checking the identification information of the first student who entered through the main door. Goethe sat in his seat, lost in thought, while also waiting for the papers to be distributed. All courses at the Academy, regardless of the format, are graded on a 100-point scale. 60 points is the baseline. Achieving this score is considered passing and earns credits for the course. However, in addition to credits, there is a supplementary indicator for evaluating student performance called grade point average, GPA. This is one of the important supporting measures for the credit system implemented by Sears Academy. The GPA is calculated as 10% of the course grade minus 5%. For example, if you achieve a score of 60 in the final exam of Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings, your GPA will be 1/60 minus 5. The biggest function of GPA is to eliminate inflated scores. The Academy explicitly requires that in most rankings and weighted calculations based on credits, an average GPA of 3 or higher is required for inclusion in the calculation. In cases of identical credits, the higher GPA takes precedence. This prevents students from taking a bunch of courses and barely passing the exams to gain credits. After checking identity information, the staff began distributing the exam papers. The questions were neatly written on beautiful parchment, and the ink smelled pleasant. Goethe narrowed his eyes, his gaze falling on the questions. There weren't many questions, they were all variations of knowledge points from the course. To delve into the river snowfield, as a one-ring mage, is it possible, and by what method? The first question was a classic easy one, designed to build students' confidence. The answer was also simple. Yes, through the first circle protective spell, environmental tolerance, in the dark forest. As a second circle mage specializing in illusion magic, you encounter a group of feline creatures inhabiting the area. How can you safely traverse this area without direct combat? This question is slightly more difficult. First, pay attention to the question. Second circle mage specializing in illusion magic, therefore, the spell range is limited to illusion magic and second circle spells. In an encounter with bandits, you are surrounded by enemies. To quickly break out and ensure your safety, please describe the spell you would choose and why. Goethe wrote down the answers without stopping. For Goethe, who had thoroughly mastered all the course materials through Divine Guidance Plus, these questions, though seemingly complex, were actually not difficult at all. As soon as he saw the question, the answer flowed naturally. They were all free points. After a flurry of writing, Goethe quickly arrived at the last question. It was indeed the last question, as an entire page was dedicated to it, clearly indicating it was a major question. It was also the highest scoring question on the entire exam, a whopping 40 points. However, when Goethe saw the question, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. It wasn't that anyone had leaked the question to him beforehand, but rather because, suppose you are a third circle mage proficient in various spells, sent to investigate an area occupied by newly formed feline creatures. Investigate the level of these new lines. Please design a comprehensive spell strategy to enter the area as safely as possible, obtain the necessary information, and leave safely. Looking at the question, Gauda found it increasingly familiar. Could it be an adaptation of the Hogan Lee line problem? And, is this all there is to the last question? No wonder it's an easy course. Thinking this, Gauda didn't hesitate any longer and started writing. He quickly wrote, finishing the last question in a few minutes. After checking the exam paper to make sure nothing was missing, Gauda packed up his things, got up, and handed in his paper. The old mage, sitting above supervising the students, raised an eyebrow at Gauda, who had just handed in his paper. The general spell recognition course wasn't difficult, especially the last question, which was always an open-ended question. Students only needed a reasonable answer to usually get most of the marks. Getting half of the first 60 marks was enough to pass the exam. Therefore, the pass rate for this course was almost 100%. However, it was rare to see a student hand in the paper so quickly. Thinking this, the old mage glanced at Gauda's exam paper out of the corner of his eye. The next moment, his already small eyes narrowed to slits. It's very full. He reached for the paper and stared at Gauda's densely written answers, reviewing them line by line. First question, correct, a free point, normal. Second question, also correct, quite diligent. Third question. After reading through them all, the old mage found that he couldn't find a single mistake by Gauda. The pass rate for general spell recognition is high, but this is only because spells are a basic ability for mages, closely connected to their lives, and they already possess a certain foundation of course knowledge before classes even begin. Furthermore, many questions in the exam only require a reasonable answer, with no fixed answer, making it easy to score points. However, this doesn't mean it's an easy subject to get high marks. It's a subject very similar to Chinese. It's difficult to fail. But it's equally difficult to get a high score. Getting a perfect score is even harder than mathematics. The old mage's expression grew increasingly solemn, and as he read to the last line of the last question, he couldn't help but nod slightly. If he were grading Gauda's paper, he would give it a score of over 95. All the previous answers were correct, a full 60 points. The only point deduction was in the last big question. But it wasn't because he found any flaws in Gauda's answer. Rather, it's because with open-ended questions like this, no matter how your answer, even if it's casual, you'll get some points. Similarly, even the most perfect spell strategy will inevitably lose some points. Because there is no such thing as a perfect spell strategy. Chapter 167 General Knowledge of Medicinal Herbs. The old mage looked at the name on the exam paper, Gauda. He didn't know Gauda personally, but he recognized the name. After all, the story of Gauda first spread among the instructors before reaching the students. Interesting. Very interesting. He picked up his teacup, took a sip, and thought to himself as he looked at the name. Of course, he maintained a blank expression on his face. Although the old mage was neutral, based on common sense, he, like most people, didn't think Gauda had a good chance of winning first place in the credit test. But now, he had changed his mind. To excel in an easy course meant he was a serious student. A student with this kind of personality, who would do something as crazy as simultaneously taking 16 courses, must have some confidence in his abilities. These young people nowadays, thinking again of the terrifying number of 16 courses, the experienced old mage still felt it was too exaggerated. But the facts were already partly clear, and he could only admit he was getting old. The other students in the classroom who were answering questions were somewhat startled by Gauda handing in his paper first, but they didn't think much of it. The image of the easy course general spell recognition is still deeply ingrained in people's minds. It's like a math exam. If someone hands in their paper first, you think they're amazing. But in a language arts exam, if someone hands in their paper first, you just think, that kid writes really fast. After handing in his paper and leaving the exam hall, Gauda didn't go back to his dormitory but rushed to another building in the academy. He had to catch up. The final exam for general knowledge of herbs was also scheduled for this morning. Of course, to avoid students who were taking 2 courses simultaneously being unable to attend one of the exams, the specific exam time was staggered from general spell recognition. Because he handed in his paper early, when Gauda arrived at the general knowledge of herbs exam hall, the hall wasn't even open yet. Students weren't allowed to enter and were simply asked to wait outside. With nothing else to do, Gauda simply closed his eyes and concentrated, recalling the composite rune diagram in his mind to pass the time. Once you have something to do, Time flies. When Gouda opened his eyes, noticing the increasingly chaotic conversation around him, it was almost time for the assessment. Outside the examination hall, a large crowd of students were already waiting to take the test. General knowledge of herbs was also a required course in potion mastery. After all, how could you call yourself a potion master if you didn't even recognize herbs? Therefore, the course had a high attendance rate, with a considerable number of students taking the assessment. Coming to his senses, Gouda noticed that many of the students were frequently glancing at him, accompanied by whispers and discussions. Under the watchful eyes of a crowd of onlookers and gamblers, all 16 of Gouda's elective courses had already been revealed. Therefore, most people knew that Gouda would be facing final assessments for 3 courses in the next 2 days. Excluding the less challenging general spell recognition, the general knowledge of herbs assessment was undoubtedly the first real test of Gouda's abilities. The students, eagerly anticipating a good show, were all incredibly curious about Gouda's results. Now that the subject is in person, it's no surprise that there's more attention and discussion. While the students were engaged in heated discussion, the examination room finally opened, allowing them to enter. The final exam for general knowledge of herbs was also an indoor exam. However, the specific format differed significantly from understanding general spells. In the spacious room, dozens of bluestone platforms were set up, each with a sealed box on it. Upon entering the examination room, the students, who had been discussing enthusiastically, fell silent, their expressions turning serious. The atmosphere became somewhat oppressive and anxious. Because the failure rate for general knowledge of herbs was actually quite high, everyone was more or less nervous and apprehensive. Gouda, following the seating arrangement, took his seat at his assigned bluestone platform. As before, staff checked the students' identification badges first, and then the supervising instructor officially announced the start of the exam with a clear bell ring. A hazy light shield slowly rose around the bluestone platform. The shield, shaped like an inverted bowl, enveloped the platform and the examinee in front of it. As the light shield descended, Gouda found his vision confined to the bluestone platform, unable to see the outside world. Anti-cheating measures, Gouda thought to himself. Everyone, open the box in front of you. Note, during the assessment, no sound is allowed, and exchanging herbs or checking other people's answers is strictly prohibited. At this moment, the supervising instructor's voice, carrying an undeniable air of authority, came from outside. Gouda calmly tore off the seal on the box and opened it. A medicinal aroma, a blend of various herbs, wafted out. Inside the box were many herbs, each with a corresponding number, each a carefully selected sample. Beside it was a scroll made of sheepskin. Gouda picked up the scroll and opened it. It contained the exam questions. The first question: please describe in detail the name of herb number 1, its most common place of origin and geographical characteristics, medicinal part, medicinal properties, and common application. Gouda took a deep breath and turned his gaze to herb number 1 in the box. This was a uniquely shaped herb, with long, slender leaves and serrated edges. The stem was covered in fine hairs, and at the tip bloomed small, pale purple flowers, emitting a faint fragrance. Ingredient number 1, Gouda murmured to himself. Information about it came to him naturally, without any conscious effort. Gouda picked up his pen and wrote his answer below the question. Purple velvet grass is abundant on the southern slopes of the Estrella Mountains. The humid climate, long hours of sunshine, and soil rich in vital substances make it an ideal place for purple velvet grass to grow. The roots of purple velvet grass are rich in various active ingredients and are often used to make potions that promote wound healing. In addition, purple velvet grass can enhance the stability and effectiveness of potions and is often used as an auxiliary ingredient in the preparation of unstable magic potions. The second question: please analyze and compare the similarities and differences between ingredients number 2 and number 3. Gouda quickly adjusted his thoughts, turning his attention to ingredients number 2 and number 3 in the medicine box. Herb number 2 was a seemingly ordinary herbaceous plant with broad, dark green leaves covered in a fine layer of dew, emitting a faint herbal aroma, and its roots appeared thick and strong. Herb number 3 looked almost identical to herb number 2 at first glance. However, when Gouda picked up both herbs and sniffed them slightly, he could faintly detect a slightly bitter, peculiar fragrance on herb number 3. Instantly, he made a preliminary judgment. He picked up his pen again and began writing the answers on the parchment. Ingredient number 2, ivy, is renowned for its tenacious vitality. Its vines are rich in magic, possessing mild medicinal properties, and are often used as an auxiliary medicine to enhance physical strength, relieving muscle tension and fatigue. The roots of ivy, due to their powerful vitality, are considered an important ingredient in life-restoring potions. Ingredient number 3, while outwardly identical to ivy, emits a slightly bitter, peculiar fragrance unique to bitter ivy. Besides the taste, the leaves of bitter ivy often have fine serrations along their edges, a characteristic not found in ivy. Bitter ivy has moderate toxicity. If mistakenly used as ivy, it can lead to. Question 3. Please describe and explain the special growing conditions of ingredient number 4 and their impact on its medicinal properties. Question 4. Regarding ingredient number 5, please explain the importance of its harvesting season, and describe the changes in its medicinal properties when harvested at different times, and how these changes affect its effectiveness in potion preparation. Question 5. Please list and compare 3 medicinal materials that are similar to but different from herb number 6 and their medicinal properties. Analyze their respective characteristics, medicinal advantages, and possible alternative uses. There were a total of 20 questions, each worth 5 points. The breadth and depth of knowledge covered in the questions were enough to give most students a headache. However, any test focused on theoretical knowledge was no challenge for Gauda, who had advanced under the Divine Guidance Technique Plus. No student could match Gauda's comprehensive theoretical knowledge in this course. Therefore, Gauda answered all 20 questions without getting stuck on any, spending no more than 3 minutes on each. After about 50 minutes, Gauda packed up, stood up, left a light barrier, and once again submitted his paper early. Upon leaving the light barrier, Gauda discovered that while he couldn't see the outside from inside, he could see everything inside the light barrier from the outside. Gauda glanced around and could see the students within each of the light shields, some frowning, some writing furiously, and others staring wide-eyed at medicinal herbs, as if trying to glean some secret. A microcosm of the exam hall. Gauda silently handed in his paper and leisurely left. At this moment, another benefit of the light shields became apparent. Their ability to block vision meant that all students could only focus on themselves, unable to see how others were answering the questions. This prevented their mindset from being affected by external factors. Those who struggle academically can probably relate. During an exam, when you find the questions incredibly difficult and are scratching your head, while others in the same exam room have already finished, the psychological pressure can sometimes be even greater than the questions themselves. Chapter 168, Perfect Score, and still a perfect score. Winter solstice month, 2nd. The nearly 7-day assessment week has ended. A large number of branch courses have officially concluded after 3 months of instruction. Joseph Pohl, the instructor of general knowledge of herbs, sat at a long table, meticulously reviewing a stack of student exam papers. During the review, the middle-aged mage occasionally shook his head, then casually tossed the parchment in his hand aside. There were already a dozen or so parchments of the same material there. Each one represented a student who had failed the assessment. A course with a low pass rate, besides being inherently difficult, often also has a strict and rigid instructor. General knowledge of herbs was no exception. Joseph Pohl was widely recognized by the students as one of the strictest instructors. If general knowledge of herbs weren't a required branch course in potions mastery, many people wouldn't have chosen this course because of Joseph. Terrible. These students are getting worse with each new batch. If they spent a little more time in class, they wouldn't answer with such an attitude. How can they possibly achieve anything in potions? After a moment of thought, Joseph Pohl's gaze fell on the next parchment. After a couple of glances, his pupils suddenly contracted, staring intently at the neat answers on the parchment, unwilling to look away. A moment later, Joseph Pohl's face flushed slightly, a sign of pleasure. 20 questions he had meticulously designed, covering a wide range of knowledge points, were riddled with pitfalls. This was the first time he had seen a student avoid all the pitfalls, and all the answers were correct. Even with a critical eye, he couldn't find a single flaw or omission in the answers on this parchment, leaving even the usually strict Joseph feeling at a loss. After a while, the blush on Joseph Pohl's face faded, revealing a satisfied smile. To be honest, when he set the question, he never imagined anyone could come up with such a perfect answer. But seeing such an answer filled Joseph Pohl with joy. Without hesitation, he wrote down a perfect score for the paper. This was the first time in all his years of teaching the general knowledge of herbs course that he had given a perfect score. Just as he was about to see who the student who had provided such a perfect answer was, The unlocked door was rudely pushed open. The visitor neither knocked nor announced their arrival, a rude act that made Joseph instinctively frown. However, after recognizing the visitor, Joseph's frown relaxed, replaced by a broad smile. It was Rhodes, also a potions instructor. They were not only colleagues but also classmates who had entered Cyrus Academy in the same year, choosing to stay after graduation and becoming longtime friends. "Joseph, have you heard? That freshman, Gwent, got perfect scores in his last 2 exams. Although general spells and knowledge and geography of Nolan continent and war geography are notoriously easy credit courses in the academy, getting a perfect score is no less difficult than other courses." Rhodes entered the room with a gossipy expression, excitedly stating. "God," Joseph frowned, thinking for a moment. "Who's that?" "Hey, you," Rhodes chuckled. "Didn't I mention this freshman to you last month?" Joseph smiled, then said seriously, "You always tell me so much, how can I remember it all?" Although the two had been friends for years, their personalities were quite different. Rhodes was an enthusiastic and outgoing person who loved gossip. Rhodes, on the other hand, was much more taciturn and had never been interested in such trivial gossip. "I know you're completely absorbed in potions, but you need to find some fun to spice things up every now and then," Rhodes said earnestly, then gave Joseph a quick rundown. "Gold is that freshman who took 16 courses." Joseph didn't recognize the name Gold, but he immediately remembered the phrase 16 courses. "Oh, it's him," Joseph exclaimed, then, remembering something else, laughed. "Didn't you think he was a show-off? Well, you've proven yourself wrong. He got perfect scores in 2 courses. That's real talent." Rhodes gave an awkward smile and weakly said, "I was just making a general assumption." Then, he slapped his thigh. "I came to see you because of him." "What do you mean?" Joseph asked, puzzled. "This freshman also took your general knowledge of herbs course. While getting full marks in those 2 credit-earning courses isn't easy, the courses themselves are relatively easy. It just shows this kid has a solid foundation and studies diligently. Your general knowledge of herbs grade really reflects his level." Rhodes subtly flattered Joseph again, then continued, "But because you went to Carl's City a few days ago to buy herbs, your geography of Nolan continent and war geography exam results are already out, while your general knowledge of herbs exam results are still pending. You've been back for 2 days already. I bet you're grading student papers today." Rhodes chuckled. "Tell me, how did this kid do with you? How, you made this special trip just for this?" Joseph sighed, conceding defeat to his friend's personality. He was easy to talk to, at least with his friend. "Okay, I'll take a look." Gouda, he smacked the name, feeling like he'd seen it somewhere before, something familiar. Wait, the next moment, Joseph suddenly realized, his gaze falling on the name on the perfect answer in his hand. The 2 characters Gouda lay there silently. "What's wrong?" Seeing his friend agree but not follow up, Rhodes asked, puzzled. Joseph took a deep breath and slowly said, "This time, I also got a perfect score." "Oh?" Rhodes raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You're our academy's famous cold-faced instructor. You'll point out even the smallest mistakes from your students, and you still get a perfect score." "What cold-faced instructor?" Joseph said, dissatisfied. "Potion brewing is an extremely rigorous process. Even the slightest difference can lead to failure. In the early stages of learning, it's natural to cultivate a rigorous attitude towards potion making in these students." Yes. Rhodes knew his friend's temperament, too responsible and morally upright, and although he felt it was unnecessary, he still respected him greatly and quickly agreed. "But I'm more concerned about Gayode's grades, to see what he's really capable of." He steered the conversation back to Gayode. "Didn't I tell you?" Joseph's smile vanished, adopting a cold demeanor as he spoke indifferently. "When did you tell me?" Rhodes paused, then suddenly realized, "Your perfect score is from Gayode." "Yes," Joseph replied. Rhodes was completely dumbfounded. He looked at Joseph's expression, confirming that his friend wouldn't joke with him. "Perfect scores in all 3 exams," he murmured. "What a talent." Joseph, on the other hand, was much calmer, casually remarking. Chapter 169 Harvest 11. Gouda arrived at the herb garden he had claimed. This garden, which he had carefully tended, had changed significantly since its initial state. Looking around, a lush green herb seedling was interspersed with yellow and purple flower buds. The Academy had specially established this herb garden, controlled by magic arrays and mages, and regularly supplied with magic crystals to nourish it, ensuring that every inch of the land contained extremely rich magical power. With sufficient magical power, Although only a month and a half had passed since planting, both the zero-tier magical plant, the taro fruit, and the first-tier magical plant, the thorn fruit, had already sprouted flower buds. The branches of the thorn fruit seedlings were covered with fine, sharp thorns. The quality of the thorn fruit could be predicted by the growth of the thorns on its branches. Clearly, these thorn fruit magical plants were growing very well under Gauda's careful care. All 30 taro fruit seeds and 10 thorn fruit seeds had sprouted, not a single seed was dead. Given this trend, achieving a perfect score in the magic plant cultivation course shouldn't be a problem. Gauda nodded in satisfaction, simultaneously applying different amounts of his prepared medicinal solution according to the different varieties and growth stages of the seedlings. He was delighted. Not because he was excited about the upcoming good results, in fact, whether in his past life or this one, Gauda had become somewhat numb to achieving good grades. At this moment, a week had passed since he graduated with perfect scores in all 3 courses. At the beginning of the Frozen Moon, Sears Academy was abuzz with excitement because of his 16 courses. At the beginning of the Winter Solstice Moon, his 3 perfect scores caused another minor sensation. The attendance rate for these 3 courses was among the highest in the Academy. It could be said that over 90% of the students in the Academy had taken at least one of these courses and participated in one of the assessments. Only those who have experienced it understand. Therefore, almost every student understood how difficult it was to achieve perfect scores in the final assessments of these 3 courses. Some admired, some were shocked, some were jealous. All sorts of emotions could be summarized in 5 words. Is this even human? The calmest person about this whole affair was Gauda, the person involved. In the world of academic superstars, they usually knew their scores when they took the exams. 3 perfect scores were slightly unexpected, but still largely within Gauda's expectations. So, he remained remarkably calm after learning his results. He had only completed 3 subjects, there were still 13 courses to go. He had only accumulated 15 credits, not yet catching up to Yulan's starting line. The revolution was not yet complete, comrades needed to continue their efforts. Gauda was still very busy and didn't have much time to show off, nor was there anything to show off. This world was ultimately a world of mages. Sears Academy was also a mage academy. Therefore, mage level was the foundation of everything. With this foundation, everything else had added value. Gauda understood this perfectly. His current joy stemmed entirely from the fact that he would receive 20% of the harvest from these medicinal herbs once they matured. This is a very reasonable price. After all, the most important elements for the growth of magical plants, the medicinal fields and seeds, are provided by the Academy. Gauda's contribution is only his labor and the cost of preparing the nutrient solution. This 20% harvest can be used for himself or sold to the Academy. The harvest of a first-tier magical plant in one season is worth approximately 12 to 15 gold. Under ideal conditions, the Academy offers 15 gold for the thorn fruit. 20% is 3 gold. 10 thorn fruit plants will bring Gauda a profit of 30 gold. The Alocasia is a zero-tier magical plant, and the Academy's purchase price is only 3 gold, so 20% is 12 silver. 30 Alocasian plants will be worth 360 silver. Together, the 2 magical plants will bring Gauda a total profit of 48 gold. Preparing the nutrient solution costs approximately 15 gold. After deducting this expense, the profit is still 33 gold. The 2.5 months are busy, mainly during the initial sowing and germination period. The rest of the time was spent killing pests, watering, and fertilizing, averaging less than an hour a day. This level of labor yielded 2 credits and 33 gold. Gauda felt it was a very worthwhile investment. It was just a pity that the Academy's medicinal fields were Academy property, and unless for special circumstances like final exams, they were generally not contracted out to students. Otherwise, Gauda would have been a true farmer at Sears Academy, contracting a large medicinal field. If he could become the top student in the potions department, as a perk, he could claim a medicinal field from the Academy each year. Even though the planting density was low due to the extremely high requirements of magic power and fertilizer for magical plants, a single medicinal field under the Academy's standards could still grow about 50 first-tier magical plants. How much money could he earn in a year? Thinking of Sadie, the top student in the potions department, who was likely also a tycoon, Gauda felt a pang of envy. Should he also take potions next year? Subconsciously, Gauda began to ponder this. The winter solstice month passed in a flash. Meanwhile, on the 20th, Gauda's apprenticeship guidance method, after 53 days, saw another improvement, officially bringing his total magical power to the 12th level of magic. At the end of the month, the plant cultivation course also held its final assessment. With 30 thriving calla lilies and 10 thorn berries, Gauda unsurprisingly achieved a perfect score, bringing his total credits to 17. This perfect score in a practical course dispelled the recent claim that Gauda is only good at theoretical knowledge. With the assessment complete, it was harvest time for the magical plants in the herb field. The harvesting was handled by personnel from the potion department, both to help and to prevent students from holding any of the harvest. You used to farm in the countryside, didn't you, Sadie, who was assigned to inspect the harvest, asked, half jokingly, half asleep. Another month passed, and the fully ripe taro and thorn berries in the herb garden hung naturally from the branches, plump and tempting. I just have a bit of interest and talent in planting, Gauda said modestly. His predecessor had worked in the herb garden for a long time, cultivating ordinary herbs, not magical plants, but still within the same field as magical plant cultivation, sharing many similarities. Furthermore, his theoretical knowledge had become increasingly solid, and he paid close attention to these magical plants, so this harvest was to be expected. You got a perfect score in magical plant cultivation, although I also got a perfect score in that course. But you also got a perfect score in general knowledge of herbs, which was Professor Joseph's course. Even I only got a little over 80 back then. You should have joined our potions department, Sadie exclaimed. Although Gauda had indeed considered it, he ultimately felt that the rune department suited him better, so he had abandoned the idea. Faced with Sadie's sentiments reflections, she simply smiled and said, "This is just one branch of potions. It doesn't mean I can master potions." "That's true," Sadie raised an eyebrow. "Potions requires a certain talent to master." As the top student in the potions department, she was undoubtedly one of those talented individuals, and she was quite proud of it. As they spoke, the potion students responsible for Gauda's herb field had finished harvesting and weighing, and reported the final results. The thorn berries yielded a total of 9 pounds 8 ounces. You get 20%, I can decide to give you 2 pounds. The calla berries yielded a total of 34 pounds 3 ounces, I'll give you 7 pounds, Sadie calculated for Gauda, looking at the harvest figures reported by the students. She added a little odds to round it up, a small perk for Gauda. Although it wasn't much, it made him feel good. Based on this year's prices, thorn berries are bought at 15 gold per pound, and calla berries at 3 gold per pound. Do you want to keep your share or sell it to the academy? Sell it to the academy. Gauda did a quick mental calculation. The final profit was almost exactly what he had estimated. The extra 3 gold was mostly from the rounding up the amount Sadie had given him. Gauda's decision was exactly what Sadie had expected. She nodded, took out a settlement sheet already stamped with a potions department seal, filled in the details and her name, then handed it to Gauda. After he signed his name and fingerprinted the sheet, she took out her money pouch, counted out 51 gold coins, and settled the account with Gauda. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 The New Year. After this harvest, Gauda's savings finally broke through the 3-digit mark again, reaching a gratifying figure of 107 gold and 18 silver. So much so that when he saw his herb field being reclaimed, he felt a pang of reluctance. I'll have to find time to take the course Utilization and Cultivation of Spiritual Land, Gauda thought to himself. Utilization and Cultivation of Spiritual Land is also a branch of potion studies, teaching how to cultivate natural spiritual land and how to create it artificially. The conditions for the growth of magical plants are very demanding, especially the requirement for extremely high magical power. Planting magical plants on ordinary land simply won't allow them to germinate and grow. So-called spiritual land is land rich in magical power, suitable for the growth of magical plants. Owning a piece of spiritual land is like owning a treasure trove. Whether he cultivates it himself to grow magical plants or rents it out to potion makers, he can continuously obtain a stable income. Such a lucrative course is practically a must-take for Gauda. However, this course was an advanced course, requiring over 30 credits to enroll, which meant being a third-year student in the traditional sense. Gauda hadn't yet met the requirement. It wasn't until Jerica knocked on his door that evening, and he received a small New Year's gift from her. That Gauda realized it was the last day of the year, the 30th of the winter solstice month. Sears Academy was also holding a New Year's celebration in the Academy Square that night. After all, apart from the local noble students from St. Sen City who would go home for the new year, most students would remain at the Academy even on this day. However, Gauda wasn't interested in the celebrations. He preferred to use that time to learn more. In a world where knowledge was expensive and monopolized, Gauda always felt a vague sense of crisis. This sense of crisis motivated him to learn as much as he could while he had the opportunity. This mentality was similar to someone who had experienced famine subconsciously developing a habit of hoarding food. As the Academy's magical bell, symbolizing the passing of the old year and welcoming the new, rang throughout the entire Academy, Gauda's first year in this world came to an end. The year 9655 of the Nolan calendar passed quietly. Listening to the echoing bells, Gauda was filled with emotion. He had arrived in this world on the second day of the awakening month of that year, and so much had happened in the past 11 months. Compared to that, his 21 years of experience in his previous life seemed like a blank sheet of paper. What would happen in the newly arrived year 9656 of the Nolan calendar was unpredictable for Gauda. He only knew that he needed to seize the present moment so that he could calmly deal with whatever happened. For this year, Gauda's goal was to push his progress in the guiding technique to perfection. As for his progress in the meditation technique, that was up to fate. However, judging from his current progress, he should be able to reach perfection in the meditation technique by next year at the latest. By then, he would be 15 years old and could attempt to advance to the first ring mage level. If successful, he would only be a year later than Yulan. However, Yulan had reached this mage level without the resources of an academy. Thinking of this, Gauda couldn't help but sigh. This guy's talent was truly terrifying. For 3 months after the new year, Gauda's life was free of any further minor incidents. He devoted all his attention and energy to cultivation and coursework. During this period, Gauda also completed several specialized courses. Merchant Guild Management and Trade Practice, also a primarily theoretical course, was specifically designed for graduates aspiring to join a merchant guild. Gauda particularly valued the trade practice aspects of this course. In his view, making money was a fundamental and essential skill for mages. In the final assessment, Gauda only symbolically lost 2 points on the open-ended trade practice question, ultimately achieving a high score of 98. This course earned Gauda 1 credit. Research on Leeline creatures, on the other hand, was designed for battle mages. The existence of Wind Spirit Moon Shadow meant that Gauda would inevitably interact frequently with Leeline creatures. Moreover, in this world, which mage wouldn't come into contact with Leeline creatures? Gauda believed this course should also be included as a required course. However, the academy didn't do that, and class attendance was low. It wasn't until the final exam that Gauda realized the difficulty was too high. Besides the basic questions, the final major exam presented several sketches of Leeline creatures, requiring students to deduce their specific information based on the course knowledge. The more information deduced and the more accurate the deduction, the higher the score. This involved a degree of luck, and the overly open-ended questions often left students at a loss. Even Gauda only achieved 85 points on the final exam for this course, which was worth 2 credits. Magic Medicine, Magic Pet Training, and Magic Engineering were all 1-credit courses, and Gauda achieved full marks on all 3. The final exam for magic ink extraction and production required students to create a magical ink sample on the spot, and the quality of the final ink was used for scoring. The quality of the magical ink produced depended not only on the technique used but also on the quality of the raw materials. In terms of technique, Gauda, with his experience in potion making and solid theoretical foundation, was undoubtedly the best among all the students. However, he didn't want to spend a lot of money on high-quality materials to improve the final quality of his magic ink, so he simply bought some basic materials and made a batch. Therefore, he only received 80 points in this course, his lowest score so far. Magic ink extraction and production was also worth 1 credit. After completing this, Gauda's credits totaled 24. The remaining courses he hadn't finished were racial history, 2 credits, pharmacological research, 3 credits, and 4 courses in the first stage, each worth only 1 credit, mage basics, spell application and combat, basic culture, and runeology. Upon completion, Gauda's first-year credits would reach 33. As for Yulan, she had 22 basic credits and 9 credits from her 7 elective courses. After completing all courses, his credits barely reached 31, 2 points short of Gauda's. Of course, only half a year had passed since the end of the first academic year. In the remaining 6 months, both Gauda and Yulan could continue to take other courses to further increase their credits. It was a matter of who could outdo whom. Gauda was quite confident about this. First, with the blessing of Divine Guidance Plus, he couldn't possibly lose to Yulan in terms of learning. Second, he had heard that Yulan had spent most of his energy learning spells recently. This was an instruction given to him by his mentor, the head of the spell department. A mage's level can unreasonably bridge the gap in resources with talent. However, mastering spells requires a lot of resources. This had caused Yulan to fall behind in spells, and now he needed to work hard to make up for it. In comparison, Gauda, whose mastery of spells was even more terrifying than his learning ability, was actually on the right track from the beginning. During these 3 months of focused study, Gauda didn't even pay much attention to his own strength or how much he had improved in this monotonous life. His guidance method naturally achieved another breakthrough on the 14th of the awakening month. His total magical power had reached the 13th level of magic tricks. After nearly 3 months of self-study, he had finally mastered all 36 classic composite rune diagrams and the stack of materials half a person's height that his eye had given him. After that, Gauda entered the problem-solving phase. Every day he would receive a requirement from his eye, then independently design a composite rune based on that requirement, and submit it to his eye for review the following day. Chapter 171 Reconstructing the System. Half a year has passed, and the level of this year's new students at Gauda is already quite clear, allowing us to see the whole picture from a glimpse, without having to wait until the end of the academic year. Although most students at Sayre's Academy are mage prodigies who entered through rigorous examinations, there are still differences among geniuses. Gauda, a wild mage from the Bremen region who entered the academy through a recommendation letter without participating in the entrance examination and enjoys the highest treatment in the academy, was considered by many to be the worst among this year's new students, struggling every year for those 10 credits. Unexpectedly, this character, whom everyone underestimated, has made a name for himself. First, he made a stunning debut in the entrance mission, breaking the record left by Dean Gavin. Then, in the examinations of his chosen courses, he achieved first place in all but one of them, Magic Ink Extraction and Production, with several courses even ending with perfect scores. As a result, although Gauda is not yet considered a mage genius, his reputation as an academic genius has resounded throughout the entire academy. He has even gained some fame among the instructors. Some mentors were simply watching the spectacle, but many more were thinking, when will this learning prodigy choose my course? Let me see what he's really made of, and whether he's as capable as the rumors suggest. Besides Gauda, 2 other new students displayed abilities and talents beyond the average student. The most famous was undoubtedly Yulan, known as the Mage Prodigy, widely recognized as the top student in Gauda's cohort. Next was Jellica Haynes, a seemingly unassuming heiress who was actually quite formidable. At the age of 13, she had already reached the 3rd-tier Mage Apprentice level. Jellica intentionally held on to her 3rd-tier Mage Apprentice level for so long in order to awaken a more powerful specialization. No one knew the depth of her accumulated knowledge. Many believe that once Jellica advanced to the 1st-tier Mage level, she would catch up with and surpass the leading Yulan in a short time. Furthermore, her privileged family background also contributed to Jellica's high level of knowledge. While not as good as Gauda in terms of coursework, she was still second among the new students. Yulan, Jellica, and Gauda were grouped together by the Academy's gossipy members, hailed as the 3 geniuses of the 9,655th freshman class at Sayre's Academy. Although each freshman class only had about 30 students, Gauda, while indifferent, didn't object either. In the school, having the title of genius was undoubtedly more advantageous than disadvantageous. Gauda only took most courses electively based on his own needs, generally only scratching the surface. The only course he studied in depth without interruption was rune literature. However, in all his time studying rune literature, Gauda had only ever encountered one rune master, his eye. After his eye secured an exemption for him from rune literature, he became even more isolated. Therefore, Gauda had no idea how far he had progressed in rune literature. He vaguely sensed that he had surpassed the first stage of the course, but couldn't pinpoint the exact stage. However, Gauda didn't care much about that. Because regardless of the stage, everyone is essentially a beginner in runeology. The path of runeology is simply too long. After submitting the composite rune diagram he designed yesterday based on Hizai's requirements, Gauda received his first criticism from Hizai. You focus too much on the efficiency of composite runes. It's important, but not the most important. Composite rune design is only an initial part of magic circle design. Your excessive focus on efficiency and premature optimization in this initial stage will affect the possibility of combining magic circles later. In the beginning, we should focus more on the feasibility and compatibility of composite runes. It's not that high efficiency is wrong, but we need to consider the actual situation, find a balance, and appropriately sacrifice some efficiency for other capabilities. After thinking for a long time, Gauda finally came to his senses and respectfully said, I understand. Hizai nodded slightly. He knew that Gauda's answer was after careful consideration, and that he genuinely understood, rather than just a perfunctory I understand. Take it back first, revise it, and give it back to me tomorrow. He handed the composite rune diagram that Gauda had given him back, then hummed in agreement, and took out a piece of parchment, handing it to Gauda. This is the task I'm assigning you today. Gauda silently accepted the rune diagram and the parchment with a question written on it, and left the rune workshop. He returned to Building 30 in Zone 1. Before going upstairs to solve the problem, Gauda, as usual, went to the kitchen to cast Water Creation Plus. For his first draw of the day, it was still honey water. Even with Gauda's calm nature, he couldn't help but frown. Since the last time he drew water without leaks, such a long time had passed, and he hadn't drawn anything other than honey water. This made Gauda wonder if he was having a Mercury retrograde in the new year, that his luck could be so bad. After Gauda left, Hizai also returned to his small room. The drafts on the table were now 2 large sections taller than before. Through months of continuous experimentation and calculation, he had gradually made some progress, grasping a glimpse of the interference constant. I need to hurry, he murmured, then unconsciously thought of Gauda, who had proposed the interference constant. Hosey was the person at Sayre's Academy who understood Gauda's abilities best. He knew clearly that compared to Gauda's outwardly displayed title of academic genius, which had brought him fame, the rune genius that only he knew was Gauda's most commendable quality. And this rune genius level could even surpass Yulan's mage genius. After all, in his life before coming to the Duchy of Xian, Hosey had seen many mage geniuses stronger than Yulan. But he had never seen a rune genius stronger than Gauda. In fact, there was none comparable to Gauda. Actually, with his current level of knowledge in runes, he can already begin designing magic circles, Hosey Okenly muttered to himself. However, under the current runic system, only a first circle mage can construct a first-order magic circle. There is no such thing as a zero-order magic circle. The skill level is sufficient, but the mage level isn't high enough, so they're stuck on composite runes. Like many rune masters, their runecraft skills have clearly reached the next level, but they're limited by their mage level, unable to construct the next tier of magic arrays. Of all the mage arts, runecraft has the strictest hierarchy. Like potion masters, even mage apprentices can concoct tier 1 potions, and the same applies to other professions. But in the world of rune masters, low-level mages absolutely cannot construct high-level magic arrays. This is the biggest obstacle restricting the advancement of runecraft. Becoming a high-level mage is a low-probability event, as is mastering runecraft. The probability of possessing both is self-evident. And for a discipline to develop, it inevitably needs a sufficient number of masters to pave the way. The old man sighed, but his eyes gradually brightened. As long as we derive the interference constant, we can change this situation. This is indeed an incredible thing. At a time when the Holy Empire, the Golden Flower Dynasty, Linhei City, and countless powerful mage forces are all painstakingly striving to cultivate a high-level rune master, who would have thought that in an inconspicuous little duchy's royal academy, there is an old man who is ignored and even excluded from the center of power by the academy, a third-tier rune master in a broad sense, who is trying to reconstruct the rune system. Chapter 172 Going Back on One's Word. Green Sprout Month, June 6th. Gauda, emerging from the first-tier training room, paid another 20 gold at the counter to extend his training room usage time by 40 hours. The price was that his savings, which had just broken into triple digits 3 months ago, had now plummeted to the critical threshold of 41 gold and 18 silver. But even in his financial straits, Gauda never considered cutting back on his fixed daily expenditure of 10 silver coins for the training room. The good news was that he would receive an extra income today. Leaving the training building, Gauda headed straight for the committee's small building. After swiping his identity badge, he entered the building, went up to the second floor, and arrived at the office of Mage Ral. He gently knocked on the carved wooden door, which opened instantly. As soon as Gauda stepped across the threshold, Mage Ral, sitting behind a long table in the office, warmly stood up and led Gauda to a reception area. As if welcoming a distinguished guest, he personally picked up a kettle and brewed Gauda a cup of fragrant black tea. Gauda accepted the exquisite porcelain cup adorned with intricate patterns, taking a symbolic sip. He noticed the fragrant aroma bursting in his mouth, a rich yet delicate flavor with a hint of sweetness. This taste was even better than the tea he'd had at Jerica's house. Excellent tea, Gauda thought to himself, but politely complimented. Queen's black tea, top quality stuff, 3 gold coins a pound, the Mage Ral explained. Such high-level treatment caused Gauda to frown inwardly. He didn't believe that the Mage, as a member of the Academy Committee, needed to be so courteous and enthusiastic. Nor did he believe that his achievements had impressed the Mage. As the saying goes, unsolicited kindness is always suspicious. A vague sense of unease rose within Gauda, but he showed no outward sign, instead feigning flattery. The Mage glanced at Gauda, hesitated for a moment, then took a money pouch from his robes and handed it to him. Gauda took the money bag, and immediately sensed something was wrong when he weighed it. He untied the drawstring and looked inside again, his eyes filled with a golden light. The money bag was full of gold coins, although he couldn't tell the exact amount at a glance. It was clearly more than 20 gold coins, probably around 100. Commissioner Ral, this, Gauda asked hesitantly. According to the original transaction details, before returning the Water of Ascension, Mage Ral was only required to pay him 20 gold coins annually. Mage Ral said somewhat awkwardly, there was a slight problem with our last transaction. Triff failed to advance to first ring Mage after consuming the Spirit Ascension water, but he gained some foundation and experience. He'll definitely succeed on his next try. So he needs another dose of Spirit Ascension water. Look, could you transfer the dose of Spirit Ascension water I promised to return to you? Don't worry, when you reach the 3rd tier Mage apprentice level and prepare to advance to first ring Mage, I'll definitely do my best to help you apply for Spirit Ascension water from the Academy. I heard that you, Yulon, Angelica were named the 3 geniuses of this year's new students. With that foundation, and with my help, applying for Spirit Ascension water will definitely be no problem. Mage Ral rubbed his hands awkwardly, seemingly still a little embarrassed about the matter. Upon hearing this, God's expression remained unchanged. Seeing Gauda's attitude, Mage Ral quickly added, here's 100 gold. The Gainapet, spell recipe and potion I gave you last time are worth about 100 gold on the market, 200 gold for a bottle of Spirit Ascension water. I'm being very generous, I'm not ripping you off. Gauda suddenly smiled and replied, Committee Member Ral, what are you saying? As a member of the Academy, how could you rip off a student? Since you need this Spirit Ascension water, I can transfer it to you. Anyway, I don't need it right now, I'm not in a hurry. As for this, I don't need it. Gauda handed the money bag back to Mage Ral with a smile. Consider it a student's tribute to you. That won't do. Committee Member Ral was not pleased by Gauda's goodwill, but his expression turned slightly stern, and he put on a righteous look. As a member of the Academy, how could I do something like taking advantage of a student like this? As he spoke, he slightly angrily pushed Gauda's hand holding the money bag back. Gauda's smile faltered slightly, then he sincerely explained, Committee Member Ral misunderstood me. What I meant was, as a student, my most important task is learning and practicing magic. If possible, Master, could you give me 1 or 2 rare spell recipes? Hearing Gauda's words, Master Ral's slightly angry expression softened. After thinking for a moment, he nodded slightly and said, I do possess some rare spells, but as you know, most spell recipes are not allowed to be passed on. This is the rule. It can be disregarded privately, but must be followed publicly. However, there is indeed one rare spell recipe that belongs to me, which I can pass on to you. With that, Master Ral stood up, opened a small cabinet locked with a secret lock, took out a brand new booklet, and handed it to Gauda. You can only study it yourself, it is not allowed to be passed on to others, he added as usual. As for the 100 gold coins, keep them. There are many places in the Academy where you'll need money. I understand, thank you, Committee Member Ral. Gauda took the copied spell formula, which was clearly an excerpt from the original, and said, thank you, it's nothing, let's call it a deal. Having resolved a matter that had been weighing on his mind, Mage Ral was in a good mood. Gauda immediately took his leave, knowing the situation was clear. After Gauda left, the smile on the mage's face vanished instantly, replaced by a gloomy expression. He remained silent for a long time before muttering, "They've already asked me for more benefits, so they probably won't do one thing to me openly and another behind my back, or report me." He sighed again. "Triff, you've even abandoned all pretense of dignity for me, using such methods to deal with a new student. Don't disappoint me again." Thinking this, the mage pursed his lips, slightly annoyed. This kid does have some skill, making a name for himself in the academy, so I can't just dismiss him too easily. But even if he has no skill at all, his mentor is still that guy Hoshi, so I can't go too far. Fortunately, he's a guy who knows when to advance and retreat, not stubborn. Leaving the committee, Gauda was quite calm. Firstly, he had been mentally prepared for the mage to renege when he first made the deal with him. Later, after learning from Shadi that the mage's apprenticeship had failed, he had even more anticipated this day. Secondly, he understood that even if he threw a tantrum and argued with the Mage Ral, the most likely outcome would be that he still wouldn't get what he deserved, and he would incur Ral's wrath. While Ral's reputation would be damaged, he wouldn't ultimately suffer any loss. Therefore, when Mage Ral reneged, his first reaction wasn't anger, but rather figuring out how to maximize his gains. His earlier feigned retreat was for this purpose. Sure enough, in addition to the 100 gold coins, he also received a rare spell recipe. His mind raced, and Gauda had already opened the spell recipe given to him by Ral. Chapter 173 Comparison. Cat's Claw, Alteration, Zero Ring. The caster awakens their wild nature, manifesting in their hands. Unarmed attacks during the spell's duration, up to 1 minute, deal significantly increased damage. Furthermore, unarmed attacks during the spell's duration are considered magical attacks. The spell terminates upon casting it again or picking up a weapon. God was somewhat exasperated. No wonder the Mage Ral was so decisive. There was another trap waiting for him. This spell, well, it certainly deserves its rare status. After all, strictly speaking, its damage cap can far exceed that of ordinary spells. The damage of ordinary damage spells is one time. For example, Fire Arrow and Freeze Ray deal damage equal to the spell's power. But, Cat's Claw, is a damage over time spell, meaning its damage should equal the number of effective attacks during the spell's duration the spell's power. Theoretically, with only one spell's mana cost, this spell can deal damage equivalent to casting several or even dozens of spells. The problem is that this is only in theory. In most cases, Cat Claw is a useless spell for mages. First, Cat Claw is a melee spell that applies a magic effect to the hands. So, you have to be able to touch the opponent for the spell to take effect. This is already a significant limitation. Second, the spell has a very high barrier to entry. At least a certain level of combat and movement skills is required to unleash the full potential of Cat Claw. How many mages would bother to learn combat and movement skills? Anyway, learning spells isn't difficult for me, I'll just learn them first. Even if they only end up on the spell list as decorations, it can still be considered as building a foundation for awakening a feat in the future. Gauda quickly adjusted his mindset. Carrying the improved composite rune diagram, Gauda arrived at the rune workshop on the 3rd floor of Gavin Tower. To his surprise, he found someone standing outside the rune workshop today. It was a handsome, tall, and richly dressed young mage. He saw Gauda approaching and immediately raised an eyebrow. "You're Gauda?" "Yes, I am. My name is Danirther, the top student in the rune department." "You should have heard of me," the young mage said with a gentle smile. But Gauda keenly sensed the subtle hostility beneath Danirther's smile, though he concealed it very well. "Yes," Gauda nodded, walking into the rune workshop. He had indeed heard of him. Sadie had specifically warned him to be wary of Danirther, and he always had a good memory and listened to advice. So, he wasn't surprised by the hidden hostility in Danirther's eyes. Watching Gauda walk into the rune workshop without waiting or even knocking, Danirther's gaze towards Gauda's retreating figure was now filled with undisguised hatred. He never imagined that even though the rune department had fallen to such a state, new students would still be joining. The rune department had been consistently underfunded by the academy, with funding being repeatedly reduced. Furthermore, the department head, Hizai, was subject to deliberate or unintentional pressure from the academy's higher-ups due to his stubbornness. If it weren't for Hizai's mastery of rune construction technology, Donnie Erther, one of the heirs of the Erther family, would have disdained joining this wretched rune department and becoming its so-called chief student. Last year, he heard that Hizai had acquired a new student, someone forcibly assigned by the academy. Initially, he didn't think much of it. Runeology wasn't something just anyone could learn. He assumed this new student, assigned to Hizai, would soon be abandoned due to his incompetence and unable to continue his studies in runeology. However, events unfolded far beyond his expectations. First, he heard that Hizai had specifically applied for an exemption for Gouda, and then he learned that Gouda came to Gavin Building to see Hizai every day. Clearly, Gouda was learning runes from Hizai. As Gouda's learning abilities gradually became apparent, rumors began to circulate that he might also possess a talent for runic literature and was highly likely to be accepted as Hizai's disciple, taught runic construction. If you want to reap the rewards, you'll have to ask me first. Thinking of this rumor, the handsome young noble mage remained expressionless, but secretly harbored a fierce determination. Master, Donnie is outside. Gouda knocked on the door of the small room, giving a brief warning. No rush, you go first. Hizai waved his hand casually. These are the revised rune diagrams, and the composite runes designed based on your requests yesterday. Gouda didn't stand on ceremony, handing Hizai the 2 completed composite rune diagrams. Hizai looked at the composite runes drawn by Gouda on the magic paper, a gleam unconsciously appearing on his aged face. He had taught many students and mentored many people, but no one had ever been able to create such excellent composite runes, so full of his own style and ideas, as Gouda had. Many rune masters had studied the 36 classic composite rune diagrams that Gouda was asked to learn. However, most of them, after learning them, would consciously or unconsciously apply the designs in their subsequent rune designs. Only Gouda truly learned the underlying logic of those 36 classic composite rune diagrams. In the rune diagrams that Gouda submitted, Hizai saw no trace of imitation. They were all independent designs based on Hizai's requirements, without any application. Even in some designs with significant flaws, Hizai could still sense Gouda's ingenuity and boundless talent from these flawed designs. Well done. Compared to yesterday's, the feasibility and compatibility have greatly improved, but it can still be optimized a bit more. For example, the sturdiness here can be adjusted, Hizai said slowly, dissecting and guiding Gouda's rune diagrams in more detail. After a long while, Gouda walked out of the rune workshop with the topic assigned by Hizai for today. He glanced at Donnie Erther, who was still waiting at the door, and whispered, "Your mentor wants you to come in." Even though Donnie Erther harbored deep hatred for God, he maintained a composed demeanor. He first nodded slightly to God before striding into the rune workshop. Although he was quite annoyed after waiting outside for so long, he controlled his emotions well. Upon entering the rune workshop, he immediately bowed respectfully to Hosey, Director Hosey. Then, he carefully took out a rune diagram drawn on high-quality magic paper. "This is a magic circle I came up with a few days ago when I was suddenly inspired. I would like to ask for your guidance." Despite his barely concealed pride, Donnie Erther restrained himself and remained humble. It must be said that his etiquette and bearing were impeccable. Hosey accepted the rune diagram. The rune diagram was on a piece of magic paper made from the hide of a flame rhinoceros, a creature of the second ring ley lines. It was of exceptionally high quality, and inscribed with a complex magic circle. Hizai examined it closely. It was a first-tier magic circle, composed of 3 composite runes, with the effects of a first-level power rune and a first-level flame rune. Judging by the technique, Donnie Erther's fundamentals were clearly solid, and his skill was highly proficient. By general standards, it was a decent rune diagram. However, Hizai glanced at it casually and couldn't help but sigh inwardly, lamenting the waste of such a valuable resource. With such fine magic paper, a magic circle with more than 5 composite runes would only be considered passable. The completion is alright. Quincy Erther's style is very obvious in the magic circle. It's clear that Quincy Erther didn't hold back on you, and you've mastered it well, but the drawback is that the style is too much like Quincy Erther's, lacking any of your own. Quincy Erther, a second-tier rune master of the Erther family. Although only a second-tier rune master, he was already one of the top rune masters in the Duchy of Sienne. So, you just want to become the next Quincy Erther? If not, stop blindly imitating. In the early stages of rune learning, drawing runes by imitating the ideas of predecessors to quickly get started is a learning method. The problem is, Donnie has been a first-tier rune master for a long time, yet the magic circles he draws are still shadows of others, lacking any of his own. In a broad sense, such a rune master can be considered a rune master, since he can indeed draw first-tier magic circles. But in Hizai's view, such a rune master is merely a high-level craftsman, essentially no different from those bricklayers who plaster walls according to blueprints, and cannot be considered a rune master at all. Actually, although he used to think such rune masters were meaningless, at least his mindset was still peaceful, and he wouldn't say such sharp things like this. Why does his personality become more direct with age? Hosey thought for a moment and came to an answer. After eating fine food, one can no longer stomach these coarse scraps. Hosey shook his head, returned the rune diagram to Donnie, and praised, "The magic paper is good, but it's a bit wasteful." Chapter 174 Mage Civilization. Faced with Hosei's somewhat sharp evaluation, Donnie remained silent. For someone who had considered himself the center of the world since childhood, Hosei's emotionless assessment was more painful than anything else. The blood in his body seemed to rush to his head, making his brain buzz and his face burn like fire. He used all his reason to control his emotions and prevent himself from losing his composure. Donnie silently accepted the rune diagram he had meticulously drawn and was very proud of from Hosei, then bowed to Hosei before turning and leaving, his figure quickly disappearing into the quiet corridor. Watching Donnie's departing figure, Hosei shook his head. He understood Donnie's thoughts perfectly. He was indeed getting old, and it wasn't that he hadn't considered finding someone to pass on his rune knowledge. But the problem was, no matter how much he lowered his standards, Donnie's level was still a long way from the minimum required to inherit his rune knowledge. Better to have nothing than something bad. If even the minimum requirements aren't met, passing on all the rune knowledge to him would be like a pearl gathering dust, better to take it to the grave. Hizai had already given up on the idea of passing on his knowledge, but then Gata appeared. The more Hizai spent with the students the academy had forced upon him, the more he liked him. First, Gata's talent in rune literature had amazed him more than once. Secondly, Gata was insightful and not rigid. He grasped things quickly, understanding everything he was taught and applying it to other situations without much effort. Most importantly, he had excellent character, was focused, and could endure loneliness. Despite his young age, he possessed a maturity that filled Hizai with both relief and regret. Relief that he had met such a student at the end of his life, regret that he had only met such a student at the end of his life. Donnie paced the quiet corridor, his figure and face shrouded in shadow, making him difficult to discern. He walked slowly, emerging from the shadows only after a long while. In the sunlight, it became clear that Donnie's perpetually humble and polite face was now filled with resentment, his eyes blazing with bitterness, anger, hostility, and malice. Although he outwardly presented himself as a courteous noble mage, he was, in essence, a narrow-minded and extremely vengeful person. Anyone who offended him even slightly would hold a grudge and seek revenge. To learn the rune construction techniques mastered by Hoshi, he, as a member of the Earther family, had willingly lowered himself by entering this long-declining rune department, and had maintained a respectful demeanor before Hoshi. He had performed this act for several years. Now, Hoshi's casual remark had completely broken Donnie's defenses. That old geezer has nothing, and it's a miracle he's only managed to get to this level as a third-tier rune construct master. If I were a third-tier rune construct master, I'd be second only to the Emperor in the Duchy of Xian, not stuck in this wretched place, being ostracized by these nobodies. He's just a useless, stubborn old man. The only thing worth mentioning is his little bit of rune knowledge. Donnie no longer hated God. He was just a junior mage apprentice. He didn't even look down on him. He hated Hosei now. He hated Hosei's stubbornness, his blindness to talent, and his refusal to impart rune construct knowledge to him, the top student in the rune department. The Earther family was a leading noble family even in St. Xian City. Such a large family couldn't possibly have only him as an heir. And he believed his biggest asset was his talent in runes. If he could go further and learn rune construction techniques from Hizai, he would be qualified to become the sole heir, rather than just one of the heirs. After all, rune construction is one of the most powerful forces in this world. Now, Donnie understands that this, which he considered his biggest bargaining chip for the future heirship, is no longer viable. However, he is not discouraged. Just now, in the shadows of the corridor, he had already thought everything through. Since you refused to teach me rune construction techniques while you were alive, Then I'll take them myself after you die. Donnie Earther's gaze became incredibly sinister at this moment, and the pent-up anger in his heart was burning fiercely. God was unaware of what happened in the rune workshop after he left. He had already arrived at the classroom and was attending his elective course, Racial History. The instructor, Philly, spoke passionately from the podium, spittle flying. In this vast mage plane, humanity isn't the only native race. In the largest and only jungle region of Terra, the Song Forest, dwells the elves, skilled in healing, beast taming, and plant magic. The elves coexist with the tree people and the spirit race. Furthermore, there are the dragons, considered supreme beings, roaming the world's most dangerous places. It's said that dragon nests exist on certain islands of Midgard, inhabited by large groups of dragons, even among humans. Besides the majority, who occupy most of the world, there are several different branches with extraordinary abilities, the most famous being four. First are the Iceborn and Wolfborn, located in the northern border of the Nolan continent. The former is renowned for its unique ice elemental magic. The latter are commonly known as the Vikings, famous for their powerful barbarian fighting style and unique berserker magic. Their magic can ignite their bloodline, granting them unparalleled power. Then there are the descendants of the sun on the continent of Terra, whose blood contains the power of the sun, giving them an innate and extraordinary control over earth and fire elemental magic. Finally, there are the Dragonborn, now rare and almost extinct. These four branches are the origin of our human mages. Long ago, before our plane was called the Mage Plane, it intersected with another plane, the one we now call the Leyline Plane. At the point of intersection, a dimensional portal appeared, the Leyline, from which many powerful Leyline creatures emerged. Faced with these powerful Leyline creatures, humans at that time, lacking magical power, were incredibly weak, treated as prey and food, utterly powerless to resist. But after the two planes intersected, the magical energy on the Mage Plane became increasingly abundant, nourished and stimulated by abundant magical energy. A small number of individuals among our human race awakened the power within their bloodline. This power allowed them to acquire magical abilities without instruction. Compared to mages, their spellcasting abilities were not acquired through learning, but rather stemmed from their innate bloodline. Something they were born with. The emergence of the Iceborn, Wolfborn, Dragonborn, and Sunborn gave humanity its first ability to contend with Leyline creatures. However, this was far from enough. After all, the number of these four races constituted a negligible proportion of the human population, and was insignificant compared to the number of Leyline creatures. But humans possess wisdom. After the innate magical abilities of the four races appeared, our ancestors, through research into these innate magical abilities, produced the first person to master magic through learning rather than bloodline awakening. Then, such individuals began to increase in number. We call these people ancient mages. Driven by their ever-growing thirst for knowledge and boundless wisdom, the ancient mages created entirely new concepts of knowledge, continuously refining the magical system. Humanity began to establish its own mage civilization, which continues to this day. Chapter 175 Inheritance. On the 7th of the Green Sprout month, Gauda successfully materialized the 11th petal of the meditation technique in his mind. At this moment, he was only 5 petals away from completing the full 16-petal lotus of the meditation technique. The later the meditation technique progressed, the longer the time required for advancement became. It took Gauda 83 days to materialize 9 petals to 10, and even with his exceptional talent in meditation, it took a full 149 days to materialize 11 petals from 10. This was far from his predicted speed. Mainly because, previously, the progress in meditation technique had never taken such a long time. Compared to the previous advancement, this time it had almost doubled. Calculated this way, it might take more than 2 years to materialize the final 5 petals. Gauda vaguely felt this was unreasonable. The next day, after his basic mage class, he asked his instructor about this issue, while also appropriately revealing his progress. Compared to the so-called silent until the moment of triumph, the gradual improvement, taking one step at a time, has more advantages besides avoiding the need for flashy displays. Firstly, it's more readily accepted and trusted. Secondly, it avoids unnecessary suspicion and prying. The meditation technique you're practicing is the apprentice meditation technique, right? The instructor, Boe, as expected of a seasoned teacher, immediately guessed a question Gauda had posed. Gauda nodded. Every meditation technique at the apprentice stage has a bottleneck, though they differ. From 10 petals to 11 petals is the major bottleneck in apprentice meditation technique practice. At this stage, Everyone practicing this method will be stuck for a period of time, Bowie patiently explained. Once you overcome this bottleneck, the efficiency of apprentice meditation technique practice will return to normal. However, normally, the person who taught you this meditation technique should have told you this when you started practicing, he asked curiously. Maybe I forgot, Gata thought for a moment and replied. Of course, it wasn't that he forgot. In Master Sada's eyes, these apprentices wouldn't live long enough to reach a bottleneck in their meditation practice, so there was absolutely no need to explain these things to them. You can forget this? How come you don't forget to eat? Bowie commented sharply with dissatisfaction. Rune workshop. Very good, I put down the rune diagram that Gata had just submitted and praised. You have completed this stage of learning. He looked at his proud disciple. After this period of setting questions and solving questions, Gata had mastered all the requirements that composite runes could meet. Logically, the next step should be to enter the formal learning content of a rune master, that is, to form a complete magic circle through composite runes. However, Gata's mage level was only a second-level mage apprentice. Logically, the next step should be to start teaching you how to draw magic circles. However, to draw a complete first-order magic circle, the minimum mage level requirement is a first circle mage, Hizai slowly said. Gata was stunned. This was something he hadn't expected at all. Because neither potion makers, alchemists, nor any other professions have this limitation. Do you know why? Hizai asked. Gata shook his head. Because rune masters don't simply draw magic circles according to blueprints. Drawing magic circles and runes is a highly technical task. If you simply draw a magic circle according to blueprints, you're not a rune master, you should be called a copyist. And even a perfect replica isn't enough for a magic circle to succeed. As for the reason, Gata thought for a moment, recalling the 6 basic rules of runes he'd seen on his first day, and suddenly had the answer. Because different properties and areas of magic conducting materials have different theoretical robustness values, so even if the same magic circle is perfectly accurate to the millimeter, it will succeed on one and fail on the other. Right, Hizai looked at Gata with admiration. All master rune diagrams are merely templates, there are no standard sizes. Even when drawn on the same type of magic conducting material, the results can be drastically different depending on the area of that material. Therefore, each rune master's creation is a completely new one, not a copy of an old one. To achieve this, a rune master must master an ability called rune tuning. Through rune tuning, rune masters adjust the composition, arrangement, position, and connection of the runes that make up the rune array based on the properties and size of the magic conducting material, as well as the specific needs of the array, confirming whether these runes can form a complete array. Through rune tuning, rune masters can perceive the threshold of runes drawn on the magic conducting material. Whether it exceeds the material's tolerance threshold, the robustness value mentioned in the 6 fundamental rules of runes, and make corresponding adjustments as needed. To achieve both of these through rune tuning requires extremely strong perception and control, both of which are part of mental power. All the tests, all the precedents, show that one must be at least a first circle mage. Only with the mental strength of a first circle mage can these two things be achieved. In fact, it's not just that. The rune tuning of a second-tier magic circle also requires at least a second circle mage to have sufficient mental strength to support it, and the same applies to higher levels. This is the clear hierarchy of runic literature, but Gauda recalled the 6 fundamental rules of runes and asked, puzzled, according to the 6 fundamental rules of runes, it's perfectly possible to design the magic circle before drawing it, and then calculate whether the magic circle can be successfully constructed on the guiding material. If it cannot be successfully constructed, adjustments can be made accordingly. And then the robustness value can be recalculated. Then why is rune tuning necessary? Because these 6 fundamental rules are not currently universal rules. They, I looked deeply at Gauda, are just rules I summarized myself, just a conjecture. After studying runic literature for a while, I discovered that the rune design in magic circles has a logical basis, and whether it can be successfully constructed can also be calculated. Later, I spent the rest of my life summarizing the 6 fundamental rules. Was this genius? Gauda was filled with endless, Genkai, deep emotion. Although he was currently only a beginner in rune literature, he fully understood the significance of the 6 fundamental rules for the entire rune literature system. These were theorems that, once established, could break the current hierarchical status quo of rune literature. And these 6 fundamental rules, possessing such significance, were merely the work of Hizai alone? However, they are not perfect. As you initially saw, the magic arrays that could be successfully constructed using the 6 fundamental rules failed in practice. I've been searching for the reason until you told me the answer, the interference constant, Gata said softly. Yes, an interference constant is missing. I've been calculating and deriving this interference constant for some time now, but it's a very large undertaking, not something that can be accomplished overnight. Gata nodded slightly. He fully understood the workload involved. To become a rigorous theorem, this interference constant could not be an approximate value, it had to be an exact value. Because the larger the number of runes in the magic circle, the more significant the difference will be after complex calculations, even a tiny error in the interference constant. I haven't derived the interference constant yet, so I can't teach you magic circle construction by bypassing rune tuning through the 6 basic rules, and you're still far from being a first-ring mage, so I can't teach you the traditional rune tuning method either. So, I have nothing left to learn in runic literature. Gata opened his mouth. Of course not, his eye smiled. Next, you'll learn a calligraphy style from me. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.